this special council meeting to order. Please stand for the pledge. Deputy Chief, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Roll call, please. Kathy?
Powell. Hayes. Here. Barstow.
Here.
Lee. Hagan.
Here.
Walter.
Here.
Carter. Here.
Okay, we have a quorum present. The purpose of this meeting, special meeting tonight, is, of course, is to receive a presentation on the proposed 2018 budget and to discuss the same. It's nice to see everybody here. The first meeting we had was just Kathy and myself and a few crickets. And, of course, it was Kathy's night to bring food. We had filet mignon. Thank you very much.
When was that?
And it was the quickest meeting in
At
history.
5:30?
We started the meeting at 6 o'clock and ended at 6:01 a couple weeks ago, and when we were all.
That meeting was canceled, and the law director suggested that.
Oh, we have it. Okay. I was
Yeah,
like,
we should open it and close it, which we did.
Just making
so.
sure I don't need to apologize for.
You don't.
having missed it.
So we opened it and closed it, so.
Yes.
Okay, we'll start with citizens' comments. Anybody wish to speak pertaining to the budget? Seeing none. Here's how we're gonna do tonight. We'll have a little overview from Mr. Nicholson. Then we'll have some, so while he's speaking and giving us the overall presentation, an overview, if there's something that strikes your fancy, mark it down as a question to present to him later. So we'll let him go through his whole presentation. And then we'll go into some global fiscal questions. And then we'll start by department. Like if he starts with streets tonight, that's where we'll start when we start with the questioning phase. And at the 2-hour mark, I'll stop and ask if council's pleasure to keep going. I would imagine we're probably going to have one more meeting anyway, at least. So it's not like we need to cram it all in, depending on how everybody feels. I know we're getting started at 6 instead of 7, so we'll see how it goes. Mr. Nicholson.
Okay, the comments are basically going to come from the smaller document that was distributed earlier. Although you all have the big book and there's a lot more detail in there, but I want to kind of walk through the smaller presentation just to kind of bring up to speed with the how and wheres. So the format for this budget is the same as we've done in the past handful of years. It includes a 5-year forecast, so 2018 is obviously the budget, and 4 years beyond that in terms of revenues, expenditures, and fund balance. The 18 number is the formal budget presentation from the city administrator being presented to council. Again, same format with the 6 major expense categories in any fund, any function. It's salary and related, contractual services, general operating, capital outlay, debt services, and transfers in advance. And those are the higher level groupings. And I'll apologize for the smallness of the slides, but this just gives you a little bit of background of all the functions within that could be within any fund. So obviously general government, which is the administration, finance, zoning, some other generic general citywide costs, information technology, and then you have executive, legislative, court and legal, police, et cetera. It goes all the way down the list there. So those are the functions that you will see as we go through the budget presentation materials. Revenue assumptions. When we developed the revenue assumptions, we really started out with year-end, what we're projecting now to have, or what we ended up at the end of 2016, the current revenue and expense. So that starts with where we're expecting at the beginning of 18. Unless reasonably expecting to receive an award, we have not included any grants that are, like OPWC or anything like that, unless we're already aware of it. Right now, there's $4.4 million worth of grant money in there for Mink Street Phase 2, and about a little over $500,000 for Taylor Road, Cleveland Road, path project, sidewalk, whatever. So those are the grant fundings that we're expecting to get. Income tax, we're expecting to be about just a little under $5.6 million, increased basically about 3% increase annually is what we're projecting. We've had really good years last few years. We've seen higher than that. I'm a little reluctant to bank on that in the future just because of fund balance. You know, I don't want to overestimate our ability to have carry over fund balance and come in short. So I think 3 is probably a reasonable stake in the ground to see where we go. We haven't intentionally included any estimate revenues from the Jobs Ready site, just because we don't know what, how much, who. You know, it's an unknown at this point. At some point, when we do start getting things more firmed up there, we will include those estimates as part of the forecast. Property taxes, the inside millage is what we receive. We got the 2018 numbers from the county. They provided us what those numbers will be, and those have been included. Going forward, we've increased them by 1.5% per year. Again, a conservative estimate. Some years, obviously, we've seen decline. Other years, we've seen greater than that. So 1.5% annually is probably a safe number for forecasting purposes. We did not build in any. I understand the utility committee is presenting an increase to a portion of the rate structure. The budget, when it was developed, did not include any increases in utility rates. So if that's going to generate additional revenue, that's an add to the bottom line for the utility. But it's not been included in this document. Wage scales, as you know, the collective bargaining units exclusive of the steelworkers, which we haven't finalized with, we're still negotiating. The FOP, OPBA, and non-unions got 3.25 this year, 3.25 next year, and 3 the following year. So those numbers have been baked into the budget, and we've done 3% annually for the outlying years, just to kind of understand where the numbers are going to go. As far as the wages themselves, we calculated them in each department on a per employee basis, so it takes into consideration any step increases these employees would receive over the next 5 years, and based on the contract or the pay matrix. Medical insurance rates, we are currently working with our broker, Wells Fargo, to identify the replacement for the current health plan. As you know, we've notified them that we are out as of the end of the year. We are looking at a number of different options. They hope to have pricing for me here within the next couple weeks, so we can bring that to council. Right now, though, for 2018, we put in a 10% increase, since we don't really know what's going to happen. And then on the outlying years, I think we did 7.5% on the outlying years. Hopefully we could come in better than that, but that's probably not an unreasonable estimate. Dental, vision, and life are projected at 5% increases annually. Those generally don't see large increases because you typically don't make any claims on the life, and dental is pretty much a straight pass-through. Income tax revenues. A little more detail here. This chart here shows you the allocation percentages. Apologize, I don't have the shorter book. I've got the original book. At any rate, what you see on this graph here is in 2017, Street Fund is receiving about 35.7%. Police is receiving 53% of the income tax revenues. Capital Improvement Fund is getting 2%, and the Debt Service Fund is getting 9.2%. For 18, Street Fund will be just a little over 32%. Police is dropping from 53 to 52, but still in the low 50s. Capital Improvement Fund is still maintaining 2%. The goal for us is to try to maintain some funding to go into the Capital Improvements Fund for projects that need either seed funding or smaller projects that can be covered by the Capital Improvements Fund. The Debt Service Fund will be taking about 13.9% of the allocation, bearing in mind that these calculations assume that the debt service for the police station is in place, even though a portion of that will be funded, and we'll talk about it later, but from the Capital Facilities Fund, we'll be transferring funds over to the debt service, but the net shortfall would be is why that increase is going in the allocation. So that's it at a high level, and now we're going to kind of drill through the funds. General fund is the first fund. One of the things that we did this year, asked each of the departments, and I pulled them out just because I didn't want this to take a lot of time, but I wanted to highlight it. We asked every department to come up with a mission statement, vision, and sort of their values, mission, vision, and values type of thing. I think it's important to understand what it is, kind of our core, what our core goals are, and what we're trying to accomplish, and how we meet them, and that's what's in the budget. But every department was very supportive and provided it, and you'll see it in this document as well as in the bigger document. But for purposes of tonight, I pulled those out. So in the general fund, revenues are projected to be about $1.5 million, and that's up a little over almost 1.4%, and that's primarily due to the increase in the property tax revenues. As you can imagine, as we build more homes, there's more assessed valuation. We're getting more property taxes. Now, again, we only get the inside millage, so it's 2.9 mils on the property tax, so it's not a huge number, but it did grow. Expenditures for the year are projected to be $1.9 million, and that's an increase of about $264,000 or 16% from this year. The biggest driver of that is we're transferring $275,000 out of the general fund. 25 of that's going to the recreation fund to support the shortfalls there for the recreational programming. $250,000 is going into the capital improvements fund to fund one of the projects, and I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, but it's a funding for that project. Right now we're projecting a year-end carryover balance in the general fund of about $663,000, and that's about 34.5% of this year's or 2018's expenses. As you may recall, the policy that council adopted was to try to maintain a range in the general fund, street fund, and police fund of between 25 and 35% balance as expressed as a percentage of that year's spending. So in essence, if you think of it in terms of 25%, you'd have about 3 months. If everything shut down, we had enough cash on hand, we could operate for 3 months. It's a very simplistic view, but the goal is basically to be able to weather a temporary downstorm. If you lose your large employer or something happens, the state bans, local income tax, let's say, something happens, we at least have the ability to retrench a little bit and use the reserves to kind of cushion us during the intervening period of time. So the 34.5% is obviously right at the top end of the target range, so that's great. And it's positive all the way through 22, although it's trending down, and you'll see it in the graph here in a moment. In 2022, it has an inflection point, and it starts to bounce back the other way. 2 new additions that we're proposing in 2018. The HR officer, which was in last year's budget but has not been hired, so we're putting it back in the budget. And the other one is an accounting clerk for the finance department to enhance that staff, and I'm sure we'll have a conversation about that. But I want to let you know that those are the adds in the general fund. And I think that's that slide there. So as you'll see from the chart, the numbers are themselves. But as you can see, that the green line is the fund balance. So from 17, we're a little over $1 million, and we end up about $360,000 by the end of 22. So the general fund right now is paying for a lot of, other than administration and finance and legal and some of those things, it's also paying for a lot of the park-related stuff. So there is some funding coming out of the general fund that if funding sources change, we may be able to realign some of that and have the general fund be a little more strong. But this general fund is pretty limited because it only gets fines, forfeitures, permit fees, the inside millage, and some miscellaneous other type of revenue. So really, revenue sources are fairly limited. So some major projects under the general government or administrators department, increased use and access and utilization of the GIS mapping. We've proposed investing more additional funds in 2018. It's being split between the zoning department, the utility department, and I believe the street department. are sharing it so that each of them has their own layer, as I understand it, relevant to what they use. So that tool is, again, being additionally invested in. Again, finance, I'm proposing adding a new accounting clerk position to help support operations. Just real briefly, Janice has already told me that at the latest she's retiring in September of 19. So I need to start thinking succession planning and how I align that. Quite frankly, she's a machine, and I'm going to be hard-pressed to find somebody that can have that volume of work product. So part of it is that having this conversation about structuring the department so that we have those resources in place so that when I do need to replace her, there's at least some support there. So grounds and buildings, BJ has added doing door replacements and column repair to the outside, kind of freshening up the exterior of this building where it's rusting and cracking and starting to look a little less than outstanding. So he's put $15,000 into the budget for those repairs. Parks, in the parks budget, the wages for Mr. Ramsey are split 50-50 between the general fund and the recreation fund. But in addition to that, in the general fund, you see there's four major things. Some trail access, about $7,500 being proposed. Replacement of a concession stand ice machine. As I recall, the capital plan has like a machine, like for the next 3 years, a different machine I think is going to be replaced. So there's a plan to upgrade that equipment. Some tree brush removal and cleanup, and some master park planning. That's all out of the general fund buckets at this point. So that's it for the general fund. Again, the general fund is, unlike most communities, the general fund we would normally spend all our time talking about the general fund because police, streets, parks, all of that would be paid out of the general fund. So we're a little unique in that respect that we have all these other funds to cover our operations. But the next major fund, and it's probably one of the bigger ones in terms of dollars, is the street fund. Revenues are projected to be just under $2.6 million. It's down by about $141,000 from the 2017 budget. Although there is a 3% growth in collections, since the percentage is changing from 35.65 down to 32.1, so it's about a 3% drop. So that's kind of where the numbers fall with the decrease in funding. Expenditures, just under $3.5 million, and that's up about almost $800,000 from the 17 budget. Biggest piece of that is obviously the capital type spending, road projects, infrastructure projects that are in place. And basically, one thing I just want to point out that this budget is not a structurally balanced in the sense of that revenues either equal or exceed expenditures. In a perfect world, we would want to see that. We want to see the fund balance not change. The balance we'll see here in a moment in the graph is trending down, although slowly trending down, and it's maintaining positive. Part of that is we are maintaining that $600,000 to $650,000 every year in addition to the other projects in the street improvement program, the ramp program, whatever. If we need be, that becomes 500 or 550, or if we need to, we can kind of move those numbers around to make it work. And again, although it's balanced, it's positive all the way, but it is going down. But at least the ratio is still within that 25 to 35%. So again, the target ratio where we're at is where we need to be. Better is always more. More is always better. Let me put it that way. But as you can well imagine, we have a lot of road, culvert, bridge, all types of infrastructure improvements that need our attention, and unfortunately, not enough funding to cover all the work that needs to be done at any one time. So we're trying to play Tetris and make it all fit as best we can. Again, here's a similar graph for the street fund, and as you can see, there's a major drop in 2018, just due to the fact that expenditures are so much higher. And a lot of that is, the large projects like Mink, where we've already funded the revenue into the fund for our portion of it, but it's going to go away very quickly once we start paying the bills for that project. But the trend line then is, stabilizes in 19 and 20, drops in 21, but kind of at the same rate for 22. So it's trending down, but it's still, again, within the ranges where we would want to see it. Although it could always be, I'd love to see it going the other way and have an inflection and raising every year. So within the street fund, there are no changes in staffing levels. They're not adding any staff. And the major capital equipment that they're proposing, we would do as a package capital lease program like we've done in the past, where we bundle it together and then we work through a governmental leasing company to arrange the financing. They're proposing a single axle dump truck with plow. That's about a $170,000 piece of equipment. A mini trackhoe excavator at $80,000. A 4-door service truck, and a skid steer broom. All that added together, it's about $280,000, so we would get a $280,000 lease financing program. The rates right now are under 3. It was about 2.9% when I last talked to them. So it's a 4-year, 5-payment lease program. And the advantage of going through that process is it allows us to stabilize cash flow, because otherwise, if we're dropping 280 this year, or that we may not be able to do another capital piece of equipment the following year just because of fund balance. So this helps us stabilize a more consistent fund balance and spending level, which is when, for example, the ratings agencies, they do evaluate us. They look at that. They look to see if we're fairly stable or if we're all over the place. In addition, there's $550,000 for Oak Meadow Drive reconstruction, and then we have $650,000 in all 5 years. Right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, I think even 18 are the 18 roads identified, or is it just all of them TBD?
They're all TBD.
Okay, so right now the funding's there, but the engineering and all that we'll have to go through to figure out which specific roads and go to come to you guys and have you, let us know. If we need to make any changes in those roads that are being picked. In the 2022, last year, we're taking $200,000 from the permissive to help subsidize that. So here's a listing of, I guess, some of the other ones. Again, we've talked about the street improvement program, Oak Meadow Drive improvements, engineering for the 2019 street program. So the plan would be to do next year's engineering this year, so we have everything in place so that early in the year we can go out for bid and get started early. Some improvements to the Mink Street Garage, and a couple other items there you can see, retention, detention pond maintenance, and some striping on Broad Street. And so that's it for the street fund for now, and we'll move on. The next major one is the police fund. So revenues in this fund are projected to be 2.9, just under $3 million. It's up by about $31,000 from this year's budget. And again, it's due the 3% growth in collections, but it's being offset by a 1% reduction in the allocation percentage. So overall, it's pretty much a push year over year. I'll take the 30,000, but basically it's a push. Spending is projected to be $2.98 million. I will give the police department credit. This was from get-go. This was the proposal, and it was a balanced budget from day one. So I give the police a strong thumbs up for presenting a budget that is balanced. Don't know if you knew that it was going to be balanced, but it is. Spending's up by just about $37,000, and main driver of that is wages. We have a 3.25 this year, 3.25 next year, so there's some wage issues going on there. Their projected year-end carryover balance is about $1.1 million, and that's equal to about 37 to 38% of expenditures. So that's right in the sweet spot. And although it is positive and the percentages are excellent, it's ever so slightly down, and you'll see here on the next graph. For all intents and purposes, it's almost a flat line, virtually flat, which is, that's what we'd like to see in every one of our funds. If we could do everything we need to get done, and that line looked like that, life would be good, because that means we're getting done what we need to get done, we have the resources, and yet able to maintain the reserve ratios that we need. So in the police budget, they're looking to increase staff by 1 patrol officer, and that's as of 18, right? I believe that's in 18. They're looking to only replace 1 cruiser, and then 2 cruisers annually in the outlying years. Looking to purchase 4 portable radios. Obviously, we still have the Marks radios. This 2018 payment of just under $27,000 will be the last year. We will be paid off with the Marks radios, just in time to probably replace a lot of them, but we'll own them. So that was a pretty big expenditure to suddenly just drop all that, to get Marks radios for the cruisers and the walkies as well. There is a little over $17,000 that we transfer to debt service that covers the annual piece to the Marks Tower, and that should be, I think that may have another 5 years on that still. And then just some small dollars for a shed to construct for the firearms. And that's it for the police. Now, 2006, 2007, or I'm sorry, 206 and Fund 207 are the Recreation and the Park Use Fund. Just to kind of refresh everybody's memory, the 206 fund is primarily funded by user fees. Those are the registrations for soccer, for baseball, for softball, whatever, donations, and any transfers from the general fund to subsidized funding. The 207 fund is the Park Use Fund, and that's where when a new home is constructed and there's a fee assessed, those monies go into the 207 fund, and those are primarily used for capital type or larger dollar projects in the parks. So just kind of putting those two, kind of identifying them, separating them. So in the recreation fund, revenue is projected to be up about 18%, and that is primarily as being the funds. We only transferred $10,000 this year. We're transferring $25,000 next year, so it's an increase of $15,000 year over year. Expenditures are just under $92,000. It's down $9 per $1,000, and I think that we're getting a better handle on what the costs are for the recreational programs. It's taken us some time to kind of get our feet wet and understand the nature of the expenses and how much they are, including the referee fees and all of that. I mean, I think we're finally starting to have a pretty decent handle on what's going through there. We're projecting the end of the year balance to be about $39,000, and it's about 43%. So again, that's that's right where we'd like it to be. Although it's positive all the way, it is going to decline in 21 and 22. So we need to make sure we're aware of that. It may require additional transfers from the general fund in those outlying years. And there again is the chart. As you can see, it kind of peaks out around 2020, and slight decline thereafter. So it ends up being about an 18% carryover ratio in 2022. The purpose of doing the 5-year is not so much that's the exact number where it's going to be. As you can imagine, the variation when you go out 5 years is pretty wide. The goal is to at least have an understanding of what are we seeing. Do we have to make any adjustments today? Does it affect our decision making today? So I think that all these extended forecasts are valuable. It's a valuable exercise to have an idea of where things are going. So in the recreation fund, again, 50% of the wages and benefits for the park manager are charged there. We've not done any additional permanent or part-time positions in this budget. Assumes current levels of participation in soccer and baseball programs continue. And we've not added any significant recreational facilities or programming in the 5-year forecast. So what we have today is what we're planning to have over the next 5 years. That may or may not be, as accurate as we'd like it to be, but as of today, what we know today, that's what we went with. Park Use Fund, and I believe this is the last one before we hit the utilities. We're expecting to get about $31,000 and roughly equal to this year's budget. Again, since this is driven by new construction, as we get a lot more homes being built, we would anticipate seeing more and more revenue coming in this way. Spending is in 2018 will be about $49,000. It's up about $14,000 from this year. Just general operating type expenditures that we're doing in the parks, and then we're using those monies for. Carryover balance ending of the year about $72,000, and that's a nice sum. Although, given the nature of the expenses that would go through this fund, you know, it's not hard to imagine we could drop $150,000 on some major park project or parks projects. You know, so that's what the money's there for. And again, nature of a capital type fund is you have big swings. So as you can see, you know, fund balance drops dramatically in 2019 because there's some major projects being proposed in 19, and then the revenue expenditures are fairly closely matched in 20 through 22, so the fund balance starts to grow again. Typical capital type fund, you're going to do that. You're going to grow up the fund balance, and then you need it for a project, and it's going to drop, and then you're going to grow it back up again. It's different than the operating funds like the police fund, street fund, and the general fund. So in the park use fund, we have a handful of projects: Liberty Park paving, Liberty Park parking lot expansion improvement. That one always you have to say it 3 times. And that's about $15,000. We have an annual shelter house roof replacement program, $5,000 a year just to replace roofs of shelter houses as they're needed. Again, the usual general park tree and undergrowth clearing, adding some gravel to parking lot areas. Again, the park pond management, $4,000, and then there's a couple of improvements and some planning for Freedom Park. So all in, capital in the park use fund is about $23,000. Total expenditures about $49,000. Capital improvement, forgot about that. All right. So in the capital fund, revenues are only are expected to be $5.7 million and are up by a little over $5 million from this year's budget. The biggest piece of that is one-time grant revenues. As you may or may not be aware, governmental accounting is odd in the sense that if the let's say ODOT pays the bill for us on our behalf, we actually have to post a revenue entry and a spending to reflect both sides of that. Even though the cash didn't come through us, we have to book it on our books as if we did. So that's why the revenue is huge next year, just because of those types of entries. Spending again is going to be $6.14 million. It's up by about $4.8 million, and again that's the capital outlays. The $5.52 million for Mink and about $600,000 for Taylor Road. Those are the biggest drivers of that. The fund is positive all the way through 22, and again it kind of does some dips. And as you can see, 18 is a kind of an outlier when you look at the graphic. Revenues and expenditures are just enormous, and then it goes down to nothing for the next few years. It becomes less of a player, but it's holding these big projects for 18. And again, we've already gone through these. In 2021, the only thing we haven't mentioned tonight is Headley's Mill Bridge replacement out in 2021, and that's about $450,000. So again, the 2% that we're allocating to the capital improvement funds allows us to build some reserves so that like these projects out in 2021 will have money in the fund to cover those projects. And then there's a $13,000 project proposed for parks to install or upgrade security lighting in the parks. I'm assuming where there is lighting, improving it, adding on to it, and if there is no lighting, installing lighting. Now that's it for the governmental funds. Now we'll hit utility. First being the water operations. That's the 601 is the primary one. Water utility revenues are projected at about $1.2 million. That's up about 1.5% from this year. While spending is projected to be $1.4 million, so it's a little bit out of sync by about $200,000. It's up by about 12%. The drivers of the spending increases are wage and benefit related costs. Again, assuming the 3.25% next year, as well as health insurance and the others, and the CIP fund, the water CIP fund will not generate enough projected revenue in 18 to make it the full transfer for the debt service in the water debt. So the water operations fund is having to subsidize it by $100,000. So that's another thing that's coming out of the operations fund next year. We're projecting year-end carryover balance at $320,000. That's equal to about just under 23%. If this were one of the street, general, or police fund, I'd be less concerned about that. But the nature of these funds, it doesn't take much to drop a major amount of money on an improvement or repair or some catastrophic event. So ideally, you prefer to have that balance up higher. And the water utility fund balance is positive all the way through 22. However, Nate and I had to literally play Tetris and whack-a-mole and try to figure out how to move things around, scheduling of projects, amounts, and try to figure out how to make it fit. We were able to make it fit, although if you look at the graphic, it's not what you'd want to see. It clearly is showing in every year expenses are greater than revenues, and the line is going down, and it ends in 2022 at a balance of about $170,000, which is about 12.6% of spending. So it is positive. We're able to show positive, but only by kind of timing of projects that might not otherwise be ideal. So clearly, these are the issues that we're dealing with in the utility side of things. As a result, really the only project proposed for the next year is the well testing and cleaning, and it's about $50,000. That's really the only major project other than routine operations and maintenance of the systems are planned next year. 602 is the Water Capital Improvements Fund, and that's the one that gets the CIP fee. Revenues are projected to be $615,000. It's down by about $50,000. We had a lot of one-time tap fees in 17. It's possible we're going to get those in 18, but we kind of need to see what 18 how it goes. If we start seeing tap fees come in and new subdivisions come in that will generate additional tap fees, then we'll increase that forecast. But for now, it's more of a normalized run rate of what we've been seeing. Spending is about $635,000. We're dropping that by about $440,000 from this year's budget. And the bulk of the appropriation in this fund is the transfer to the water debt service fund. There's $425,000 out of that $438 that go to service the debt of the water division. And really, other than, well, I guess in this fund, the only capital project proposed is the annual meter replacement program, where they're replacing the old meters with the upgraded Wi-Fi meters or whatever those are, so they can remotely read them. Year-end balance is going to be projected to be about $835,000, and that's about 131% of expenses. But again, we had to move things around to make it fit to come to this level. And there's another graphic in the capital fund. As you can see, the green line, it's the wrong trend, unfortunately. So we end 22 with about $200,000 in this fund, and it's about a 25% reserve ratio. So ideally, we'd like to see that number closer to the 40-50% number. Moving on to sewer, the sewer operations fund. Revenues are projected to be about just under $1.25 million, and that's about the same as this year. We're not really anticipating any major growth in revenues. Expenditures are projected to be about $1.3 million. That's down about 6% from this year's budget. And the biggest thing and the reason for the decline is reduced spending on contractual services. In years past, last year and this year, we spent a fair amount on engineering and legal fees. We're not anticipating those in 2008 as much in 2018. Projected year-end carryover balance is about $1.2 million, and that's about 90%. So this is a fairly much more healthy fund than the others. The graphic shows it. You've got a balance that ranges from end of next year of 1.2, let's call it, to a low of $943,000. So clearly the sewer fund is sitting in a little better position than the water fund is. And then in this fund, we haven't projected any major projects. Again, the projects we would do are pretty pricey. Finally, I think this is the last fund, the Sewer Capital Improvements Fund. Revenue is projected to be just under $500,000, and that's down about 6%, 6.4% from this year. Again, it's the issue of the tap fees, because you get a water fee and a sewer tap fee at the same time, so if one's down, good chance they're both going to be down. Spending is going to be just about $940,000. That's up about 26% from this year. Biggest piece is additional capital outlay, $510,000 in the interfund transfers, $400,000 to meet the debt service. Really, the only significant capital project proposed, there's a $500,000 upgrade of the water reclamation facility. And Nate can give you more details on that. It's a 2-year project, and basically it's $1 million project. It's $500,000 this year and $500,000 next year is what's being proposed. And as you can see, again, the nature of a capital fund, it's the yo-yo. It's falling down, and you build up some reserves, then you spend it out, and you build up some reserves. So capital improvement funds tend to do that. If you don't have the revenue, you can't spend it on projects. Once you do get the revenue and you spend it, then it falls off. So, so in this one, again, the only projects were the meters and the water reclamation facility upgrade. And that's blowing through a lot of information very, very quickly and trying to give you guys enough time to ask us questions about the budget. I will compliment all of the departments. They did an excellent job getting me the information. I think we had a very good working relationship this year on this budget, and I think the fact that we got it done early is testament to that. So I appreciate all their help and support. And with that, I'm done.
Well, and we're going to move into our big fiscal questions for Jamie before we go department by department. But just please keep in mind that about leave at least 5 or 6 minutes till 7. Deputy Chief needs to go upstairs for a PBR meeting, so I don't want to lose him before we get some questions to him. So does anybody have any global fiscal questions for Jamie on finances before we get into department by department? Mr. Walton.
I do. And Jamie, I do appreciate you guys putting all this together, and it goes without saying that this is a discussion. It's not an argument. But there is, and I think I asked this question to you and BJ, but I wanted to ask it, in this forum also. When I look at everything, the bottom line, essentially, when you look at all the funds together, and I know there's a lot of detail back and forth between funds, but in essence, and you had confirmed this earlier, but I just want to make sure that that's still the answer. We are outspending our revenues by plus or minus $3 million. So essentially, the budget itself, in general, with all funds included, is about a $3 million in the red. Is that correct?
Yes, there is an imbalance of about $3 million. Also understanding that some of that is by design because of reserves that we've built up to do certain projects, but yes.
Okay.
There is a
And
disconnect there.
I went back, just can I follow up on it?
Sure.
Okay, so last year I looked at last year's to see, just to compare.
Right.
What did we do last year? And I don't know if you had a chance to look at that or not, but it seemed to me we were in the red about $1.5 million last year. Does that seem about right to you?
Yeah, it seems about right.
So my last part of that part 3 of the follow-up is, when it's said and done, what you can project for a 17, where did we end up? If you were, because I know not all the departments used every fund that they had, all funds weren't expended in the budget. Where did that really end up? Do you know offhand? I mean, in third quarter,
where
I
did
guess.
16 end?
No, where do you project 17 to end at this point? If we were budgeting to be $1.5 million in the red, are we going to end up at $1 million in the red?
That is the process. Once this was presented, I'm going to be doing my year-end.
Yeah.
I always do a supplemental appropriation at year-end to reduce spending where we're not going to spend it, and that's the next exercise.
Okay.
My guess is we always do end up with multiple $100,000 opportunities where whether either projects couldn't get started or decided not to be done, or they came in better than anticipated. Revenues, income tax revenues are a little bit above, but not like last year where it exceeded it a bit more. I think income tax are pretty much going to hit the mark this year. So to answer your question, that's the next step, is to kind of gauge where we're going to end up. Bearing in mind, though, that these assume that we spend every dime this year, just as make sure we're on the same page. Obviously, that's not going to happen. We're not going to spend every dime, but how much
I
is
just don't want to be an
question.
alarmist and say, hey, we're 3.5 million, or we're $3 million in the red on this, when we're actually going to be, in reality, we may be $2.5 million in the red, even though that's still not, in my opinion, a really great thing to be.
Right.
But I just wanted to bring that up and say, it seems like we have some big projects this year that are going to really put us using a lot of our reserves. A lot meaning, millions of dollars of reserves are going to be used. And I just wanted to point that out in my review, that's what was immediately brought, that I came to, just looking at the bottom line, that was a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else? Yes,
I have
sir.
a quick one. I was going to ask, Mr. Nicholson, you talked about a 3% increase in the income tax collection. Are you basing that on compliance, increased compliance, or on increased wages of people that move here, or overall salaries are going up? Do you look at all that stuff?
Yeah, it really is kind of I kind of look at the historical run rate. What have we been doing in the past? There's an expectation in whether economists will differ. You can ask 3 different economists what the economy is doing today, and you'll get 3 different answers, from it's going gangbusters to it's in the crapper. Expectation is that yes, there's a combination of increased wages for our residents, some increased compliance. That's in the hardest part for me, is in the first years, I keep thinking, oh, that's the new normal. This is the new normal, this amount. And then it grows even more. So I keep waiting for, every taxpayer to be, compliant, and we know that's the new normal. So I think there's a combination of increased compliance as well as the economy growing, plus as we add new homes. Schools don't necessarily care for the additional rooftops, but purely from a selfish fiscal officer perspective for the city, I love them, because it's income tax revenues that help us support operations. So the more homes we get, the more revenue we have, the better we're off to provide funds. Again, that's purely selfish as a city finance director, not as the school person.
Anything else, folks,
That's good for me.
before we move to the departments?
I've got 2 more, if that's okay.
2 more?
Yep.
Just one. Go ahead.
Go ahead, you write them down if you want.
Go ahead.
Jamie, on the property tax revenues that you have estimated in the budget, is that something that you received? Did you estimate those prior to the reevaluations of property tax? I'm just saying that because I know mine went up substantially, and I would assume many in the Pataskala went up substantially. When did that happen, and would we expect some different revenue because of those?
The county formally, that's the whole rates and amount certificate. That's kind of what that process is. And so I assume that was, to answer your question, I'm not sure, but I assume it was after all the revaluation, because they're the ones that provided me, here's the estimate for 2018. I have to assume that that's after they've revalued all the properties, because the thing to keep in mind is that, people may assume that, well, my property value went up 10%, that means my taxes are going to go up 10%, and that may or may not do anything. But, yeah, to answer your question, I believe that included all the revaluation in there. But they're the ones that gave us the numbers.
Okay. One last one, and then, or one last global one. In the use of the reserves, and I know this is a big issue that we've been talking about in the utility committee. The rate structure for taps. We've talked about those going up, but we've also, been very clear. Nate's been very clear that the rate itself for per 1,000 gallon needs to go up, needs to be changed. How much of our reserves? I assume when you talk about the transfer of that 425,000 of it is to service debt.
Right.
On that, is that coming from reserves? Is that a transfer from reserves?
No, the CIP fees that are generated.
Is it the difference between the 425 and the 438 that's coming from reserves?
In essence, yeah. So, like, for example, I think in the water fund there's a $100,000 supplement. So in essence, that's coming out of our carryover balance. We're spending $100,000 to supplement
Okay.
the debt service.
I just wanted to try to figure out that, try
Yeah.
to say, okay, if we're making a global statement that we're 3 million, we're using 3 million of reserve, 100,000 of it is clearly coming for water debt, period.
Right.
And then I tried to do the math. It looks like about 700,000 or 800,000 is still being used out of reserves just for utilities in general.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
Yeah, that's about the number
Okay.
I had.
Okay.
And again, you could tell by the graph, because the blue bars were always below the red bars.
Okay, so in essence, it's safe to say a third of the use of the reserves is coming for utilities.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Just finishing up this financial lingo here in the crapper. All right. Any other?
Do you want to go to police fund so we can?
Yeah, let's go ahead and go, if we could, I told you we were gonna go by department and start with streets, but if we could deviate real quick, go to police and get Deputy Chief on his way, and if there's any other questions on police, I'll obviously try to answer them, and if I can't, I'll get you the answer. So, any questions on the police budget?
Yeah. Let me get there.
You used up all your questions on the.
Those were global questions. Yep.
You have some questions? Go ahead.
That's okay.
I'd like to hear a fresh voice.
Well, my first question is how have this year I applaud, if that's the right word. You guys keeping it to one cruiser, right? For the upcoming year. How much have you guys looked? Or is this? I think we've asked you this before. The dual cruiser every year, 18, 19, 20. Do you anticipate that is a hard fact, no doubt, or are you putting it in that budget to say our plan is to close out 2 cruisers every year? Or so my first question is, could those change? Could you go to 1 cruiser and 2 18? Because I think at one time we had 2 cruisers scheduled for 217.
Correct. That's fluid. We anticipate to operate the program how we have been, to just cycle out these vehicles and bring in new, so it keeps the program up and running, which was the whole purpose of the program to begin with. So yeah, but it is fluid. Yeah, we anticipated that 2 in 2017, but we decided based on what we have, 1 will be sufficient this year. Anticipate some of the 2012s starting to get more issues, and the fact that we're also down personnel right now. Some of the cruisers aren't being used near as much as they have in the past.
Okay, give everybody else a chance if they have one.
I will tell you that, that we're starting to see much larger repair bills on the 2012. I just saw a couple for between $600 and $1,200 repair bills on 2012 cruisers, so
Well, you're getting up to the
it starts catching up
right.
with
You're
you.
getting into the brakes and the transmission and the.
And we're now starting to get into the new cars. When we started this program to get to, I think the one that will be replacing will be way over 100,000 miles by the time this budget gets enacted and we actually buy the car. So.
Well, there's actually, there's 2 vehicles that are up there pretty high. One of them, we still have a 2008 Crown Victoria, with well over 100,000 miles, and we have a 2012 Dodge Charger with 90, almost 93,000 miles on
Is
it.
that Mr. Morton's car?
Yes.
Is the 8 the punishment car? When they get in trouble, they have to drive a 2008 Crown Vic?
It's a canine.
Mrs. Carter?
You talked about being down officers, and in the budget, there's, an allocation for 1 additional officer. If you are we overall adequately staffed right now, or are we understaffed in our police department?
I would say, to be honest with you, we're a little bit understaffed, and we're trying to build that up. Where we really see our major problems is if we have somebody go down. That's when we really see it.
Okay.
We've experienced that with Officer Dirth. His absence. It's hard to catch up because we've replaced him, and then we replaced him with a part-timer, and then you don't have a part-timer, so you got to replace the part-timer.
Yeah.
And it's not, in our line of work, you can't just bring somebody in and say, here you go. It takes, a good 2.5, 3 months to get them trained and ready to go, and then by then you lose somebody else. It's not official yet, but we're probably going to lose somebody to Newark in the next week. We've got other officers who are in process with Reynoldsburg. As much as I'd like them to stay, we can't compete with these other communities financially. So the increase that they're getting in wages, we just don't have any reason to keep them, or any reason for them to say, yeah, it's worth staying. So we have given a test, and we're working on that. We're down a part-timer right now. And, pending what happens with Officer Dearth, I mean, that really could be 2 years out before we find out what's going to happen with him. So right now we're kind of in flux, and we're getting people, and then we lose them, and then we get them. So we haven't been able to maintain a full staff.
So we're training them,
Yes.
giving them experience, and then they find a better paying job.
Yes.
Okay, hang on. Is that, you done?
I just one follow-up question,
Sure.
if that's okay. So obviously we can't compete with the salary wages. Do you think, is there any other reasons that you would see them leaving? I mean, is it because we're understaffed, so the hours are maybe more grueling than they would be in another municipality, or the fringe benefits or the facilities, or any of that have anything to do with it?
I really think the bulk of it is wages. I mean, Reynoldsburg is probably close to, they're topping out almost double what our guys make. So we have no possibility of competing with that. And then you factor in that Reynoldsburg's hiring 12 people. They're having trouble finding quality candidates. They know a lot of our guys.
Yeah.
So and our guys are very good, so it's hard to pass up on them.
Anything, Todd? We got just a couple minutes.
Well, maybe this is something just to think about. I guess this is a numbers situation. What could we do? We just negotiated a contract, but maybe we ought to look at paying our officers more. Is that what the department is suggesting? Is that we increase their pay?
I don't expect that to happen overnight.
No, of
but
course not. No,
I do think that's a direction we need to start looking, because, like I said, we cannot compete with these surrounding agencies. And when we border Franklin County, so, a lot of these agencies in Franklin County make much, much better money. And, I'm not in any way saying we need to match them, but if we become more competitive and get a little bit closer, the fact that we have a good working department and people like to work here, that will help us when it comes to, well, am I leaving for a little bit more money, or I'd be happy staying here with the way things are for a little less money. But right now we can't do that just because the money is so different.
So even because the money is so much better at some other department, even though there's an officer might say, I really like it here, I like my work hours, I like the administration, I like the community, it's a nice community to work in, that just is overridden by making $10,000 more a year or $15,000 more a year or whatever.
Absolutely, especially when you have, just to give you one example, I won't give you the name, but we have an officer whose wife doesn't work and stays home. So that increased income, is a necessity for him.
Okay. Okay.
Suzanne, you got anything? Candy?
So just to be clear, this is an additional officer, no matter what happens with somebody leaving, one leaving, two leaving, whatever, they would be replaced. I would think that under the current budget, you would replace those that would leave to go somewhere else.
Right.
This is an additional officer so it would bring it to, and I know you guys gave us a matrix of how many officers you had, how many part-times and that kind of stuff. So Ms. Carter asked about, what do you base that on? and I asked the question, is there some formula that you guys use on a per population demand? That's how many officers you have to have? Or is it a square miles kind of thing? I know we have a unique situation here where we have both a large square miles, but I ask the question and then I get the answer back, well, we're growing in population. Well, okay, is it based on population then? Well, no, we have a lot of square miles. So I can't really put my finger on, is there anything else out there that we can say, yeah, 20 officers is the right amount, or 21 is the right amount, or 22 is the right amount? I know in 2 years, it looks like you have at least forecasted another officer to come in. We're not growing in size, so I guess, or growing in land mass or land area, so I'm guessing that's based on population desire to have another officer. So is there any way you can tell us that, how does that number compute? How do you know?
That's also based on the number of calls, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we look at call volumes. I mean, if we went on the standard formula.
That's a third criteria.
Well, I mean, the standard formula, if you go by FBI standards, would have us at 35 officers. So we are well below.
But is there anybody in is typical, somebody who is comparable to Pataskala that meets an FBI standard?
I would say your Reynoldsburgs, which, again, they're low right now because they've lost a lot of people. Newark's struggling really badly right now with keeping people, and they've lost people and haven't been able to replace them. But like I said, that's why I'm not going by the FBI standards. I'm going by how we have been able to operate under the conditions that we have. And like I said, our call volumes are increasing steadily. But where I'm seeing the problem is when we have somebody go down, that's when we are really stretched thin and guys are overworked because they're putting in a lot of overtime. And you have to remember that these overtime hours are also on top of court time. We're seeing much more of an increase in road coverage overtime versus your standard court time and holiday pay and things like that. But and then I think you do have to start looking that there's a lot more homes that are, I believe, upwards of 1,000 new homes proposed. And, we've got to prepare for that because it's going to start happening all at once. And, it's hard to just stand back and let that grow and then, we need 3 or 4 more officers. If we can steadily grow that to meet those expectations and continue to provide the level of service that we want to provide, and I think that these citizens expect, I think this is the appropriate way to do it.
Okay, it's about 7:05. I just have one quick remark. Why is Reynoldsburg why did they lose 12 people? I mean, people come and go. People come and go here. People, see other opportunities. I know one guy went to the sheriff's office because he wanted to get into SWAT. We don't have SWAT. There's all kind of reasons. We're only down a couple, and we're trying to replace those. We're asking for one more officer. So, but do you know anything
There's all
about
kinds of factors. I mean, there's retirements.
Right.
They had some convictions.
True.
There's all kinds of things that factor in. There's people that just wash out, and they no longer want to do that job anymore, which in
Mike,
today's climate I can see.
I do not want to take you away from your next meeting. Can you answer a quick question?
Sure.
You recall we promoted somebody to sergeant from patrol?
Yes.
I believe you guys at that time said that individual is not going to be, that promotion won't affect our readiness, or we're not going to have to come back and hire somebody. I want to confirm this officer is not because of that necessarily.
No, not at all.
Okay, I just want to make sure. We had asked that, and I wasn't a gotcha question, but I want to make sure that it worked the way you thought it worked. So
yes, it did absolutely work the way we thought it worked, and again, right now we're down a part timer, but like I said, we anticipate in the next week losing another, and then potentially by December another. So,
Mr. Barstow, quickly.
Just very quickly, just something the department might consider, is surveying your officers as to what they like, what they don't like, what's important to them. I mean, obviously, economics are important. You have a family, you got to support your family, but are there intangible things? And maybe that would help us if you could get those results. There's some very good tools that can be used, us and the department, to see, well, so we know what direction to go in from a financial aspect on this situation.
Well, with the most recent information that we have of people potentially leaving, we are going to start doing exit interviews.
Okay.
To try and ascertain some of that.
But maybe like just survey all the officers top to bottom to see what's what's
We're
important.
pretty much a pretty close knit
Okay.
group,
Well-
and we got a pretty good gauge on that.
But it might, they're anonymous, people, they're just a suggestion, so there's something, we can see something, that's just.
Absolutely, anything
Yeah.
to help, sure.
Yeah, would help us, I think.
Thank you,
Okay.
Deputy Chief, we appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. I'm going to go to this meeting, and I'll come back, and if there's any additional questions, I can.
Yep.
Well, the PBR's down here,
Yeah,
they're down
you're-
here with a warrant.
Your
to
boss
process.
is here to
Coming
get
to
you
get
right
you.
now,
Somebody-
so.
Hey, Mike. I got another police question that you might be able to answer. So, just so I'm clear on this, the additional, the car, the cruiser that they're proposing, that's to replace a car. That's not to buy a new car.
Nope.
So if you add an officer, right, what car, is there a car sitting, waiting for them to utilize?
Yes.
That's what's happened right now.
Crown Vic.
Yeah, apparently the really old
From
Crown Vic.
2006.
The old dog car, no, I'm just,
I promise I saw it the other day, and I thought it was one of those that had been sold at like a, like an auction, and somebody had it, and it was actually one of our officers. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
No,
wow.
I saw it over the weekend, I thought I was hallucinating or something.
Would it make a nice car for a new driver?
Mr.,
Oh, my
you know,
God.
No, it would
15-year-old
not.
looking
It's
for
got a
car.
lot of
No, you
pickups.
don't want that. It's got the highway.
Mr. Morton works part-time, and he's one of our canines, and he loves that car, and he's been using it to death, so. All right, let's move on to general. We'll start with general fund. And any questions for the general fund for Jamie?
I'll start with one.
Okay?
Jamie, the downward trend in the general fund, is it due to the $275,000 movement? And can you refresh my memory as to what that movement was?
$250 of that is to go to the capital fund to subsidize, can't remember which project it was, but a project. $25,000 is the subsidy for the recreation programs.
When you looked, or when you mentioned that before, I went looking for the 250. I'm trying to figure out what it is for, because even in the little book's kind of narrative, it just said and $250,000. So I don't know if it's.
It's being transferred to the 301 fund to cover, and I believe it may. I don't know. I have to confirm which project that was specifically for.
Okay.
Andy?
Yep. In the two additional people, the accounting clerk and the human resources officer, what would be your estimate of that? What is the budget amount, including all their benefits, all their fringe, all their insurance, all that good stuff? What between those two, and if you can give me one for each, that'd be great.
The human resources officer is a part-time position. At least that's what we were proposing. So that one has no, other than PERS and the like, it has no benefits. It doesn't have health insurance or anything like that. The accounting clerk was planned for about a $40,000 level, full-time. And again, it would depend on their level of participation in health insurance. I mean, it would vary. But assuming, so let's see, probably 15 to 20% for benefits, so 20%, so
About 50 grand.
about 50 probably, maybe a little more than 50.
Yeah, the reason why I ask, the only salary that I can actually track is actually the park director, and that the only reason why is because his is separate. There's only one.
Correct.
And it's really easy to figure it out. So,
Bless me.
so when I look at that, it looks like there's a salary, and then everything else that goes with that almost doubles that salary. Nearly, it's like 90%.
It depends on, again, the coverage level. If they come in and they're a single person with just themselves, or they waive coverage, it's very, very low. If they come in and they have family coverage, obviously it's a higher number. Finance is also one of the departments that is allocated. So looking at the general fund, you're only seeing about 20% of a lot of those costs, because the street fund picks up some of us, the police fund picks up some, water and sewer. So it's hard for you to track the salaries. You'd have I can show you the salary model, but you'd have a hard time
I
saying.
can't. I've tried.
You won't be able to.
I tried. Okay, so would it be safe to say that an average would be $60,000? If you were, it's not 80, because that would be doubling it. It's probably not 20%.
Probably 60 to 70 probably is a safe number.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Barstow?
Yeah, Jamie, I have a question about the additional person in your office. And kind of the way you pitched it was as sort of a trainee to Janice, and then when Janice leaves, is this person going to move into Janice's job, and then the new job will be eliminated, or will there be two people at a time?
No. There's a couple things. One, from an internal control perspective, segregation of duties is key, right? So in a perfect world, you at least have three people. So one person takes the cash, makes the deposit. Another person posts the entry to the accounting system. The third person then reconciles the bank account. So you have separate hands on each phase. So that's ideal. Well, in a department of two, and when Janice was on vacation last week and a half, I'm taking the cash, writing the deposit ticket, posting it to the ledger. It's what you got to do in a small department, but that's the first thing. So it's improving internal controls and kind of the whole thing. The expectation is Janice, having been on this job for 20 years, again, she's a machine. And the work ethic she puts in, on average, she's 50 hours plus every week. So when I end up replacing her, it's probably going to be more like a 40, 45-hour kind of person. I'm not going to get the kind of workload. So what I want to do in anticipation of having that is having sort of a reallocation of the workload, so that there's that person handling some of those, the clerk position handling some of the more basic stuff, and not the expectation that the clerk is a slide over, but it's an accounting clerk, and that the Janice position would actually be replaced in the future.
Thanks.
But that person still would see the everyday operation, would help that person.
Absolutely. The other issues we have, I mean, if I'm gone, if I'm laid up in the hospital, I have no backup. Janice is my backup, and if Janice is gone, I'm her backup. I mean, we really don't have much redundancy, and in fact, that's why frequently when I'm on vacation, I'm processing payroll, because I'm the one who does it, and it's just, it's what you got to do.
And I know this was one of Tommy's questions. He couldn't be here tonight, but we wanted to try and keep it all finance and get the HR out of your lap. Why haven't we gotten an HR person?
Yeah, you'd have to talk to BJ. BJ, I advertised it, and that's in his lap. I don't
Fair enough.
defer on that one.
Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question about the new person as well. I don't know, is that the first time that this has been brought up by just putting it into the budget as a?
I've had conversations with BJ prior to putting in the budget.
Okay, I guess for me, that's a little surprising, because anytime any other department has wanted a person, we've run them through the ringer. It's gone to the committee, and then the department head has had to provide us a number of different things to prove the need. Now, I'm not saying that there's not the need there, but I'm saying that if I were to support another body, it would be if you went through the same process as the other department heads. So I'm a little disappointed, I guess, that it went straight to the budget and it didn't come through the finance committee, HR committee, or any of that. So, just my thoughts.
Fair enough. Andy?
Just a couple note parts on this. I can't follow where you have master park planning, and in your 925 you have $2,500, right? In your October 11th spreadsheet, you have $3,000 in your budget book. You've got $2,500 in the 925. I can't figure out where what you're spending on park planning. And it says master planning. So I'm sorry, in your budget book, the general fund on page 424. It says master planning, multiple parks, and you don't have anything for 2018, but you have $5,000 for 2019.
So in master planning is in the park use fund. A lot of it's in the 207 fund in 18. So Freedom Park layout is $2,500. There's a master park planning, multiple parks for $2,500.
Okay, but in the general fund, you're calling out $2,500 in the write-up in your write-up, and I can't find it in your master. I can't find it in the
That
next.
one may have gotten moved. I think you're right. It's the Park 15003. That one may have gotten moved
Okay,
to the 19. It's $5,000 in 19.
okay,
So, yeah, it's possible.
great.
Mr. Hicken?
No, I'm okay.
It says 3,500 in one of them, 2,500 in the next, and then it doesn't show up on the chart at all. That's what I was trying to say.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Maybe I'm not okay. No, I'm not. I got a quick question. And I hesitate because I might have wanted to say this in the parks section. This is my education only. Levy money that comes in, I realize that's not in here, right? We're not,
Got the levy that's going to be on the
If,
coming ballot, yes.
will that money be diverted into capital improvement? Will it be diverted into parks? Will it be diverted into recs, or is the answer yes?
Can I say, it won't come until 19.
Well, we'll start to collect it. We'll actually start to collect it
I
in
believe
18.
if it passes in November, it'll be on the tax bills in December.
Correct.
We'll collect in 18.
Well, just to let you know, we looked that up with BJ, and that's why we decided not to put it on in May, but put it on in November instead, so that we would grab it for the start of the year, rather than, you're right, if it was in May, it goes all the way to 19.
Next year.
That's absolutely correct.
But when we'll need to look to see, my guess is we'll probably want to create a new fund for the park levy proceeds. So we would do a revenue forecast and have a supplemental appropriation if we wanted to spend any money out of it in 18. Otherwise, we would just, grow the balances or whatever. We'll need to come back to you guys to spend it.
Okay. Right now, a majority of park funding comes out of that capital improvement
The
fund.
three funds, the general fund, the 206, and the 207
But
funds.
dollar-wise, I think the biggest punch comes out of the improvement fund. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a general
Yeah.
question.
Anything else?
Not for me.
All right. Street Department.
I have 2 words for you. Kyle Moore drainage. I hope you have more than 2 words for me.
Is that a question or a statement?
Or a challenge.
It's just 2 words. Kyle Moore drainage. What's up with that?
Well, we had originally planned to do engineering this year. That got shifted into doing a study to look at the alternatives. That's still going through the Streets Committee. The proposal or the report is nearly complete. There's a couple questions Mr. Walter had that were being addressed. And what it looks like is the preferred alternative was the original alternative. So then I've moved the engineering till next year, and then construction to the following year.
Thanks.
Mr. Hicken?
I see in the budget, you have Oak Meadow down as $550,000 for 18.
That was one of 2 things in Jamie's presentation that I had different in my numbers. I actually had 600,000 for Oak Meadow, and maybe that got changed, or
Well, being on the street committee, because we kind of talk about that every now and then on the street committee, that caught my eye. So that was something, I don't know if
It's in the CIP as 600, but I think that the 50 of it is under engineering, like for construction administration.
okay.
It's contractual services versus the capital project. I think that's where the 50 is. The total project is it's service 17006 out of the street fund, and it's 600,000 in total.
So I'm just trying to understand that. Is it going to be? I guess in that instance, I'm kind of trying to say, hey, are you budgeting it right? So we don't get surprised and have you guys say, well, we asked for 550, but it should have been 600 or whatever. And I think the answer is yes.
Total is 600. 50,000 is set aside for construction administration and inspection fees.
And how does that jibe with I wish I could remember, because we have so many numbers thrown at us at the street committee.
So the only thing that does, so okay, I'll go through the numbers as I recollect them. The Oak Meadow Drive drainage itself, I believe was right around 400,000. between 350 and 400,000. The Hickory Drive drainage was around 100,000, so that brings us up around 500,000. The asphalt path, and there was one other facet, I thought. Basically, the only thing that I didn't include was the asphalt path. I was hoping to use fee and lieu funds to cover that. Everything else for the drainage, and, oh, sorry, the other part was the overlay of the road, which should be just under 100,000. Those should all be incorporated into the 550. I'll double check that. I didn't bring any of those with me specifically,
Yep,
but
if I can, I think the number was 630,000 total. There was a $50,000 contingency in there. So I'm a little bit, I need to go back and relook at that also, because I'm not, I think we were definitely wanting to do the path. This was an all-in project rather than parts and pieces. And I know you've got 80,000 in lieu being utilized on the Taylor Road path. So I don't know that you can use them twice. If you, in here in the budget for the Taylor Road, there's an $80,000 in lieu being utilized to reduce that price down.
Taylor Road Trail?
Yep. It's in here. We can get to it when we get to it, but it's, there's an 80,000. It says includes 80,000 in lieu of fee to be utilized for the Taylor Road bike path. So, anyhow, we need to definitely, I'm with you, Tim. We need to make sure that that number's right before we do half a project.
I don't recollect the Taylor Road in lieu.
I'm sure we'll get to it. It's definitely in the budget book.
And then I had to set specifically at street committee potentially using the in lieu for the Oak Meadow project.
I do.
So,
I recall that. I have one follow-up.
Okay, go ahead.
My next one, I said it's a follow-up, but it's not. Can you talk to me a little bit about retention, detention pond maintenance for 25,000? Just kind of, I know we've done the survey on the pond, on the retention, detention ponds, and then are there some that are our responsibility, and that's what that's for?
yes. So the report isn't quite final yet, so I don't have the final version of what we need to do. But there is a significant effort for ponds that are ours. Some of those are just default because there's no HOA, so they become ours as far as I can tell. So yes, that's for ones that, for work that we need to do to some of those retention ponds. For work that's deficient now and then maintenance over the next, well, depending on my guess.
So that would be equipment and things that we need to maintain it ourselves. We're not gonna budget out, we're not getting a contractor to come in and clean out.
Well, yeah, as far as dredging and that sort of thing, that would need to be a
Dredging.
contractor.
Gotcha. If they're that wet, that they can't be mowed and maintained, they would be dredged. Gotcha.
That's all I had for now.
I'll just jump in here real quick.
Go ahead.
Because Tommy had wanted me to mention now that the Bristol drainage has come back to visit us. Have you had a chance to have any conversations or look at that number? Or I can remember when I was on council, we discussed that, and we were going to try to do some of it in-house, and the residents were all going to end up paying us back for that. Can you refresh my memory, and is that going to be inserted or talked about at any length?
And Tommy mentioned that to me. My challenge right now is the first, I'd heard something of it since I've been here, but the only really I've heard about it is when we had that meeting out there with Mr. D'Onofrio the other day. So I have seen nothing on prices or what was really proposed, other than I heard, or a set of plans that I've heard were supposedly there. I've not seen those. I'm going to be reaching out to Stantec to see if they did them, because I'm assuming that's who would have done them. However, I don't see what they could have produced, because I don't see how they could do something there with an under drain, is what I'm told was being proposed.
Okay.
So that would be putting a drain under the ditch, but Jason and I walked that, and there's nowhere to take an under drain to.
Right.
So I'm very skeptical that we'll be able to really do anything that's going to amount to much in there. I'll definitely look into it. I've not really had any time to do anything.
And that's a discussion for another day. Mr. Walther.
Okay, so I've got a few questions here. We had talked earlier about maybe having some pictures of the four-door service truck and the single axle dump with plow, just to get an idea of what kind of shape is that vehicle in. I know you guys are proposing for it to be replaced, the crew truck, essentially. You know, we're obviously, you know, again, I'm going to go back to the deficit spending. That's what we're doing right now. We are in our reserves. So I want to make sure that these things are absolutely necessary. Do we need to replace the crew truck? Do we need a new single axle dump with plow, or do we have a plow that can fit a new? You know, I guess I'm just asking these questions to see what all we absolutely need to spend money on right now.
Okay. The service truck is an 89.
And you know what? I've got a 70 Buick. It's beautiful. I've kept it in great shape. So I don't care about the age. I'm just asking, is it usable? Is it usable to get a crew from A to B to do the work? I don't care what it really looks like, actually, too.
Let me ask you a question, because I'm not understanding the deficit, I guess, as much as you are. I know we had a bunch of planned things like Mink Street and Taylor Road that we're going to be spending this year. So I know when you look at like the bottom line on the sheet that I have for 2018, it's a very large number, but it was planned. So I wasn't aware of a deficit specifically in the street department. Am I wrong on that, Jamie, or am I seeing something different?
Well,
am I not seeing
I look at the
all
heartbeat.
departments?
The heartbeat doesn't look good. It's going
That's
down.
Partly because our revenue got decreased by 3%.
Right.
And the other part of it is over 5 years, I'm showing need. I mean, if you look at the ramp, the drainage project.
So this is a function. This is a function of what do we need to spend? Do we need to go into reserves to do so? If we're going into reserves, that's deficit spend. That's spending in reserves that we are not getting funds in. We're not getting revenue in to cover. So in the way I look at it, that's deficit spending. So the question I'm asking is, out of this list of things that you need, or that you've got on the list, obviously we're talking about Oak Meadow. We've been talking about that. We've got multiple drainage projects to be done. Some that aren't on here. Cable isn't on here. I'm looking through your street fund thing. I'm hopeful that Mill Street culvert's in the ramp project somewhere. It's not called out separately in your on page 424. I don't see Mill Street culvert called out separately. Now we've got a Bristol drainage. You know,
Some of those things you mentioned, this was created before we even knew that was an issue.
I understand.
And the first one,
so
Cable.
you got to see my point. My point is,
pretty sure Mill Street's in here. Just have to find it.
well, I'm looking and I didn't see it, and I spent some time on it. So,
SBC 17005, 50,000. That's what I'm showing on my sheet.
okay, so when you go to 424, are you on 424?
I don't have that.
Okay, 17004, then there's 17006, so I'm assuming that one isn't on there. Just, it may be a glitch, but we've got to account for it in the budget that may not reflect in these graphs. So again, I'm asking about the equipment. Existing crew truck that we have, is it adequate? Is it falling apart to the point where there's holes in the floorboard? Is it unable to start in the morning? You know, those are the kind of questions I'm asking about this equipment. Do we absolutely need to replace it? Whether it was planned or not planned, drainage happens, and we've got to go spend money on drainage. I would rather go spend $50,000 on a drainage project than $30,000 on a service truck, because we have to. Those are priorities. That's what I'm asking.
And I'll get you the pictures. So part of this is that Jason has a two-door truck with an extended cab. Most of the street guys are a little bit bigger. It's hard to fit more than one extra person in there, at least comfortably. So the idea is that we would replace that truck with the four-door truck, move his down to the fleet, and replace that 89, which, in my opinion, yes, it does need to be replaced, and I'll work on getting pictures. It did not start, not that I'm aware of. I'm sure the maintenance costs are increasing as time moves on.
As an FYI real quick, just so you know, Mill Street is in the permissive tax fund, the 205 fund.
Okay.
So there's
Thanks.
50,000 for Mill Street culvert. Yep.
And Alan, I'm assuming also that we'll probably save money instead of renting every year. mini track hoes and excavators that if we have one, it's gonna pay for itself.
That would be my take on that. It's a lot quicker for us to do ditch work. With the backhoe, you've got to set your bucket down, set your outriggers out, dig here. Of course, if you have to dig here or here, you're not digging it straight with the track hoe. You can continuously move. It's the same with culverts. We're planning on replacing a bunch of smaller culverts on Headley's Mill, for example, next year. A track hoe makes that a lot easier, a lot quicker of a job. And another thing with that is the utilities department, I don't want to speak too much for Nate here, if you want to chime in, spends a significant amount of money getting Ventura Brothers in each year to just dig for them because they don't have the equipment to do that. And that's something that we hadn't come up with a specific plan for, but if there's a way to share the cost of that, or certainly, I'd certainly want them to be able to use that equipment as well. On top of, with rentals, you don't know if it's going to be available.
Right.
You have to tailor your schedule to that. Weather delays become an issue. So I know when I need a tool, I go buy it. I don't rent it, but that doesn't factor into this so much.
Gotcha. You don't have to sell me on that. Mrs. Carter?
Okay, so my question is, I don't know what a mini track hoe is. I don't know. It don't mean anything to me. All I see is $80,000. So what I want to know, dollars for cents, is if we bought that piece of equipment, where would my savings be? And I want to see it like there's a $40,000 project that we would have had to spend $20,000 renting or whatever, and this is going to fit into that savings. I get that it makes life easier and faster, because that's ideal. However, is it economically feasible? Are we cutting out something else?
Okay.
That,
Yeah, Mr. I mean,
Good.
yeah, the example would be the product shed, my favorite city building, because seriously, we saved, even though we spent money, they'd 100,000, what was it?
For the building?
For the building, what was it?
The building project was 300,000.
300, I mean, it was
We're spending $100,000 a year
Year
in disposal.
in disposal. Okay, that's it. I mean, so eventually, that's a building that ends up paying, at some point, it pays for itself, and then we save $100,000 a year because we don't have to pay. So I think that's what Mrs. Carter is talking about. That's what I look for too, is that, okay, we don't have to rent a thing from some company, but other than the convenience factor, what does that cost? What are we spending in rental fees on projects? What do we spend on rental fees on projects this year, maybe between utility and streets, that this machine is going to replace, and then how's it going to pay for itself? I think that's what Ms. Carter and I are looking at.
I believe I understand what you're asking. I'm trying to visualize
Well,
how I'm going to make that happen.
Okay, but I wouldn't expect you to know that right off the top of your head, but that's something you can get back to us on and say, well, no, and in fact, it's actually cheaper to rent from whoever we're renting from. I can't remember the name of the company, but it's actually cheaper to do that. It may not be very convenient, but it's cheaper. So we're just looking at it from I think Mrs. Carter and I are looking at it from the monetary
Walter?
aspect.
So my discussions with Alan have been that this past year, we've basically rented for 2 weeks a mini track hoe to do ditch work. And that's what I understood Alan to tell me. Last year, we rented it for 4 weeks. Mayor, I understand your point, but I bring up some other points to rental versus ownership. Obviously, and Jamie informed me that every year he goes and he looks at equipment, and we have insurance to pay on whatever equipment we have. So there is going to be insurance on this piece of equipment that we would own. There is maintenance. We just got done talking about police vehicles and the maintenance costs that go up and up and up. These are not inexpensive pieces of equipment to maintain. There's tracks that come off. There's a number of things that happen. When you rent something, you don't pay any of that. And if it breaks, they bring you another one. The other part of it is, and I kind of broached this with BJ and Jamie, we have a finite amount of time that these guys can use a piece of equipment. It's like our DuraPaver. I mean, they're not out using that 365 days a year. They're using it, 30? I don't know what they use it, but anyhow, there's a certain amount of time that they use it, and the rest of the time it's sitting. I don't know how much the utilities would share with street department. I know we had discussions a year ago about a trailer they couldn't, that they had to have their own trailer. There was things that they don't share. And there was a discussion about, between the Parks Department and other departments that they can't intermingle equipment. And I don't know all the details on that. I don't want to know all the details on it, but if we go and buy a piece of equipment, whether it's the skid steer broom, whether it's the mini track hoe, whatever it is, I think it's absolutely direly important that this thing is used a great amount of time, greater than the rental. And if our rentals have been on average $3,000 a year, then we can rent something for 20 years, by the time we pay for this. And we'll pay maintenance, and we'll pay insurance, and we'll pay so forth and so on. I'm just gonna voice my opinion that I think the rental avenue, especially since we are spending in reserves right now, I don't see the need to bring a track hoe on board and go spend $80,000 of our reserves to do that. That's my opinion. And I'm gonna say it about, again, the four-door service truck and so forth. We have so many street projects and so many drainage projects that I'd rather spend that reserve on. That's just strongly my opinion.
Mr. Hicken?
As you put together what we've asked for, one of the things that I would also say is, I agree with Andy, and I understand everybody on council who looks at bottom line stuff. Don't forget to tell us about instances where, it's very easy to get stuck looking at bottom line. The answer sometimes is, I know we used it for this amount here and this amount here, and I'm not saying that's not what happened, but our anticipated work next year is X, and we would be renting it this many more times. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that would kind of, because I try to take in as much of this as humanly possible. And the other thing is, and I don't think that's the case with the mini track hoe, but if you were to look at me and say, the mini track hoe we absolutely have to have here because if the water main breaks on New Year's Eve, we can't fix it until February. One of those emergency situations where it might behoove us to own a piece of equipment. So I don't know. That was the first thing I would say, with the caveat that I appreciate the comments from my fellow council people. The other one I have for you is a general question about, when I was looking in here, I seemed to see Broad Street Crossing appear places in the budget, but I don't know if that is the crossing that we have spoken about. And I'm talking now about crossings at Taylor, Broad at Taylor, Broad at Township, and Broad at 310. So I've seen in here Broad Street crossings once or twice, and I can't put my finger on which fund it was, and I wanted to ask you if that has made it into the budget, because that was something that I was kind of high on. So I want to see if it got in there, and if we need to have a discussion about that, that's fine. But do you recollect if
I think you're putting two different things together. There's a Broadview crossing,
it was at Broadview?
and that's a drainage improvements project which we pushed out to 2020 and 2021. And then there's some Broad Street things like striping on Broad Street.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember if there's another specific Broad Street thing.
There was one, Alan, SVC 1464 Broad Street Sidewalk.
That's a 2019.
Well, there's 50,000
Oh,
in 18 and 25 in 19.
sorry, yeah.
It says provide new pedestrian facilities, intersections in high foot traffic area.
And that's one that, and I don't know that there was a specific use identified for that. That was an SVC, that was a 2014 project. That was more BJ wanting to bring that one back to life, to get that one, and part of it could be used for those crossings. We did not have a specific sidewalk in mind for that. There's no design, there's no plans.
Okay, because that is something I think is direly needed, and I realize we just got done with one part of us saying we don't have enough money, and here I'm about to bring up something that I think is important for those three places in the city where people are very nearly getting hit all the time. It just scares me to death. So that may be something I'd contact you about, and BJ, sit down with you guys and maybe, and, you know, and just say, hey, is there any place we could squeeze something out here? I know we had talked about fee and lieu, but fee and lieu is now looking at Oak Meadow. I know when I originally brought it up, I foolishly thought we could just paint a crosswalk on the street or put up a sign to warn people to make them less likely to, and we obviously have had multiple discussions about that, where you can't just do that. It's much more involved. And, but that remains higher on my list, and I didn't see it in there, so.
And I think you're aware, we have this study going on with OSU right now to put together the pedestrian travel plan. That is about the extent of it right now, and then looking at grant funding for a couple years out. And I think that's all that's committed into the budget so far.
Okay.
Besides the Broad Street sidewalk, that 50,000.
And that maybe it must have been that caught my eye, because knowing how we've discussed what different things were, that Broad Street, I was trying to figure out if that was the genesis. Is that a placeholder? Is that one crossing? Are we going to pick the most dangerous, or, you know, stuff like that? So that I got a question on that. If you can find out, you and Mr. King.
Mr. Barstow.
The Broad Street sidewalk caught my eye, because where exactly on Broad Street is the sidewalk going to be?
That's what I was just saying, we
Yeah.
have a specific plan. for
Okay,
that.
I was, okay. All right,
Anything
Thank
else?
you.
thanks.
Okay, let me check with Suzanne here. You got anything? Okay. Before we go back to Andy, anything else, boys? You got something?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
My questions
Go ahead,
have been
Mr.
asked or
Walter.
answered.
The improvement to the Main Street garage, can you give us some more detail on that? What exactly is happening there? I read what was in here, but what's exactly the issue there?
Last year, it was talked about putting doors on the, garage doors, basically on the facility to the east. We store a fair amount of equipment in there, and there's no doors on it, just to protect the equipment that we have in there from the elements. The second part of that is the room in the building at Main Street. Basically, Jason shares that with the crew. So we're looking, there's a mezzanine up there. We'd like to either put Jason's office up there or the break room up there, so that he can have a separate office, which is kind of necessary for him to do his business and deal with issues with the guys and whatnot.
Is it impossible to handle that somewhere else? I mean, do you have to handle that at the garage?
It's not impossible.
Okay. And as far as the doors, what would you say that part of the estimate is? If you were to, do you have any idea what, I mean, could you break it down into?
I think it's about 20,000 for the doors and 15, it's roughly split.
Split between the two? Okay.
Anything else?
Yep. The salt application, can you describe what the brine application is? I know we had bought equipment last year, and you were describing to me in a short session of what exactly that brine application was, because I was confused about the application on the road necessarily versus what you were describing. Can you tell us what the benefit of that is?
So last year we did for the pre-wetting of the roads, brine application to the roads, which would be, we have a tank in a truck, and it has nozzles, and it will, if we know a storm's coming, we'll go out and hit the main routes, potentially some of the subdivisions, to help peel things off in there, because once it gets run over, it starts to stick, it's harder to peel off. So that's what we did for this year, and we'll be implementing that. All the equipment's bought for that, and we'll be implementing that this year. The second part of that, what we're looking at here, is pre-wetting of the salt. Salt doesn't activate by itself. It needs to be run over or wetted to activate, to start melting the snow. So that's what this is. We would be putting on at least a couple of the trucks, I don't remember exactly how many of the trucks this would get, where we would spray some of that brine. We would have small tanks on the trucks, would spray brine onto the hopper as the salt's coming out and being spread onto the road, and it would activate the salt quicker to remove snow, ice from the roads faster.
Pre-treatment. Not using it as a pre-treatment? This would activate the salt quicker.
This would activate the salt. 'Cause especially in situations where, at 30 degrees, salt activates relatively easily on its own. At 10 degrees, not so much. Other places, some places use different things. calcium chloride, I believe, is one of them, but.
Beet juice.
Beet juice, and different things have different negatives associated with them, how they affect your car, how they actually deteriorate the road. This one seemed to be a good, best value, especially combined with using the brine in a truck to pre-treat the roads, since we'd already have some brine on site in a tank.
Anything else for street department? All right, moving on to, I think, Parks and Rec.
All right.
Is that, am I right or wrong? General fund, police.
Yep.
Recs. The rec fund. Recreation fund. Any questions? Any input? Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I can't figure this out yet, and I know, Jamie, we've asked this we asked this the last time about the $6,000 for the online recreation program registration website hosting. We went back to the.
Yeah, and
We don't know what
Ann
that-
spoke with me today about it. I think it was yesterday. Days kind of blur. BJ was the one who pulled this budget together, and I think it was based on last year's budget. We had $5,000.
We had $5,000 in there, which we haven't spent
Yeah,
yet.
so you're gonna have to. BJ's gonna have to answer that one.
Because I went through Janice's stuff, and it looked like what we paid active was like $650 or something, or $800 or something. Okay, so maybe we just need to look into that a little further before. Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Barstow?
The only question I have is assuming the park levy passes and then we start collecting with tax bills that come due early next year, are we gonna, would it be smart, would it not be smart, to sort of have an alternate parks budget that reflects that potential revenue?
My thought about that would be to basically, once we know we're gonna get it and count, and they can tell me about how much we're going to receive or should receive, we would come back to council most likely with a supplemental, and it might mean we move some expenses out of the 207 fund over to that fund and, do some rejiggering of the numbers. You don't know how many people are gonna not pay their tax bill, so I wanna see, I assume most people will pay the tax bill, but there will be some non-collection. So I want to see what the numbers come in when we do finally get them. And I figure we would come back to you guys and go through that process.
Well, yeah, we're talking about property tax bills. I think the collection rate on property taxes
It's pretty high.
is pretty
It's pretty
high.
high.
It's higher than income tax, I'm sure.
But I personally haven't seen the numbers of what, based on the current valuation, what it's expected to generate. So
Yeah, we have, I think the estimate that we have on the millage estimate was based on the old valuation. That was done before the reevaluation, so it may be somewhat higher. I don't know.
And then the other question is, I guess that's what we have to, you guys have to give some direction is, do you want to build up some of those reserves so you can do bigger projects, or are you wanting to do pay-go type of thing? So, I'm thinking that's probably a question post the election. If assuming it passes, we can have that conversation in November and easily modify the budget to include it.
I'd prefer to hear from the Parks Board and see what they, I would hope that they are working on that sort of as in an alternative way with some good faith estimates, and I think that we have them, but then I'd like to hear from them what they want to do, and I'd certainly take that into consideration, absolutely. Okay, thanks.
Anything else?
I do. I
Yes.
have something.
Yes.
This is a question for whoever wants to answer it. The Trail Access Park land project to Car Park, which I think is behind us. I do not remember. I believe that's budgeted for like $7,500 next year, and I could be wrong. And I'm trying to figure out exactly what that is. I read it, and there's a good write-up that talks about connecting multiple parks, but it looks low in cost to connect multiple parks. And so I'm looking for any input you can give me on that.
Somebody come up? Is that microphone on, Kathy? We'll get it.
And if you don't know, I can cite, you probably know, Dr. Walther, but.
Park Advisory Board Chairperson. In response to that question, a lot of the car park
planning that the board has gone into is basically waiting in a kind of a tandem zone as the police department moves forward. I believe that that specific instance of $7,500 was something that we projected for either a evaluation or a design type interpretation based after what we did with the police station. So it was an idea that we will have to plan, we will have to do some type of partnerships with people. We certainly have to look at above or below the railroad, some of those things. So we tried to put a number together based upon how many hours we thought we would have to do and then how much investigation would be done. But until the police station and everything that goes on with the park is completed, that will probably sit in a stasis and move forward as we move forward. And I think if you look farther ahead, Carr Park is actually year 4 of the park master plan based on the levee passing. So we do have that, and we are, and I'm going to go ahead and answer Mr. Barcer's question. We are prepared with a budget, a quasi-budget, to give to Mr. Nicholson. Also, one of the differentiations between the two accounts, or even if we add the third account from the levy, is the idea of number of years that something can be purchased with that account money. So some of the less year expenditure properties, for example, some of the equipment, some of the stuff, the paint, that kind of thing, that could be pulled out of a different funding mechanism, but the money that's received based on home building must be a 5-year capital improvement. So there will be some juggling should the levy pass, but fundamentally the park plan will be as the park plan has been put out right now.
It did. And I see now that path is designed to go up broad and connect through the settlement to foundation.
It is
Kind of the
huge-
holistic plan of the.
Exactly. And it is on one of the pages as it's moved forward. There's a whole master site plan based on, the aerial of how we would like to see some of that done, but it will be a long process.
Okay.
Ma'am, would you stand there just one more second? Anybody have any questions that possibly Ann could answer for us before we have her seated?
I'm just kidding.
What's for dinner?
Yeah, right.
How was your day, honey? That kind of stuff? Thank you, ma'am.
I don't know, Ann, do you really need to ask him what's for dinner? He should have already planned that, right?
Thank you, Dr. Walther. Anything else for parks? Recreation fund, okay. Park use fund, do we need to go there, or are we pretty much?
We got that.
CIP, capital improvements?
For parks?
Just for parks?
No, we're moving on. We're moving out of parks and going to the capital improvements fund, Fund 301.
That really overlaps with the
that-
public service.
Yeah, that,
Okay, just making sure.
And
No,
this is where I wanted to point out, Ellen, you had a question of where that 80,000 payment in lieu was. It is on the 2018 budget, Capital Improvement Fund 301. Jamie's, I don't know what page number it is, but anyhow, when you look under public service, it has the Mink Street, then it has the Taylor Road, Cleveland Avenue Trail Sidewalk, 601, or 601,500, and then 80,000 from payment in lieu.
Page that's on though?
Well, it doesn't have a page.
Did you hit it?
no,
The
It's
small
this
budget
page right
book
here.
isn't paginated.
That one.
One of my favorite words.
Mrs. Carter and I found it in the big book, and we'll.
And I was trying to find it in the big book
We
too,
found
but
it.
I couldn't find it.
Yeah, page number.
Page 457.
Okay. Yep, exactly, right there it is. Thanks. So, I guess the question I would have in that is, how much money is in the payment in lieu fund? And are we counting the $80,000 a few times?
Right now, I don't think there's a whole lot in there. I know, and maybe I was mistaken on what we decided on the path. I still had that in my mind on Oak Meadow as an option and not a definitive. Excuse me if I'm mistaken on that.
I think I think you're right. I think we talked about how do we get this thing back into budget. We may be able to use payment in lieu to take up the path portion. It was like $90,000 or something, and we were going to see, or
I think it was less than that, but okay.
okay, but whatever the case was, we were going to see if we could use payment in lieu of to reduce that back down to the budget, kind of get that back into budget with the additional drainage that we had. I think you're absolutely right on that. But I think your budget is actually, the 600,000 is the total without that payment in lieu. So,
Okay, and I know this is way out in 2021, so I'm kind of wondering a little bit why it's on here, but 450,000 for the bridge. Is that one, I thought we were all done with, or pretty much done with bridges. Is this one that's already was done recently and has to be redone again, or is this an old one, or what?
That is,
And where's it at? Which one, which
it's
bridge?
on Ridley's Mill. It's currently rated at 100%. That's me throwing money in the budget because I know within the next 5 to 10 years, we're gonna need to replace it.
What's that close to? Which bridge?
Off the top of my head, I don't know if it's 5 years out.
No, I mean, location, close to Allward, close to
That's what I don't know.
Patterson? Oh, okay. All right. So who put this together? Who was,
I put that number in there as a placeholder. I don't know what's gonna take to replace that bridge.
okay.
But I know I originally showed more than that, because I think it's gonna take more than that. But as we were balancing this out over 5 years, trying to show need, we reduced that one to 450,000.
Because when I first got on council, Mr. Boland was still here, and we were feverishly working on and getting grants and all kinds of cool stuff to get bridges done. So I don't know. I'm sure you'll go down that avenue when you get there, but I'd love to know where that's at when you get a chance.
Yeah, there's no guarantee we're gonna need to replace it in 5 years, but right now it's at 100%, and once they go less than 100%, is when you see.
Time to start planning.
Replacing it. As some of the items in the budget are, they're in anticipation. There wasn't much of a inventory when I got here of really anything.
So who's still doing our bridge report for us? Is that ODOT?
Yeah, it's through ODOT this year, yeah.
And all our bridges are at 100%?
100% or better once Columbia's done, yes.
Very good. Okay, anything else for capital improvements?
Well, yeah, I have one.
Okay.
And this is general overall, because, well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm at the water capital improvements. Is that
Okay, we're not in the utilities yet.
my fault? I don't have one.
Okay, we're getting close. Hang on. Hang on, anything else? Okay, moving into water and sewer utilities. Go ahead, Tim.
So the first one I've got, first of all, I realize since I chair the utility committee, I appreciate the work. I appreciate the work that all department heads have done, but when you look at the scrimping and saving that's taking place in Nathan in your shop, the first question I have is I don't think it matters. I'm not a grammar attacker. Page 358, Creek Road spelled wrong. Big whoop. That doesn't matter to me.
Oh, spell it the native.
C-R-I-C-K, Crick.
My question kind of goes a little bit holistic. When do the bonds, the 2012 bans that were short-term and were then rolled into the 2014 long-term bonds, do you know when those fall off?
I've got that spreadsheet in my office.
Well, one of the reasons I ask that is as we see the line go down, we talk about deficit spending and the fact that the water and sewer, more the water than the sewer, are in a downward slope. Are we getting to the point where those bonds falling off would raise the line, and have we taken that into consideration?
I'm not sure which bond specifically, but like the 2005, the refunding of the 2007 bonds, still at the end of 22, we'll have about $4.3 million outstanding.
Okay.
So there's a lot of debt out there.
Yeah, that's the water plant upgrade project.
And that at least represents about $800,000 savings over.
And that's one of those
They're right.
loans we can't.
Yeah, well, that's bonds, we already refinanced
Oh,
those.
yeah, yeah.
But the OWDA ones, the water treatment plant, or wastewater treatment plant too, again, at the end of '22, we'll have about $2 million outstanding. And OWDA, you can't prepay, you can't refinance, you're just stuck.
Didn't you say they were, one of them was like in 27? I thought we had a utility meeting where you mentioned the number 2027. Does that ring a bell?
I think the water plant one is like 2030, 31 or 32.
Okay, whichever. That's
Yeah.
fine. I mean,
And then there's like some smaller ones like the, oh no, that's sewer, never mind. There's a couple sewer ones, like the SCADA system. I think there's a couple more years on that. And one over there, 2019 and 2020, I thought. But I've got a cheat sheet on that in my office. I should have brought that. But
I wish I could read my note to myself, but I can't, because I was going to ask about the money that got transferred. That's probably a Jamie question, but within the water program, the money that got transferred to make,
To supplement the debt service?
to supplement the debt service, that's a one-time thing?
Yeah.
All right. And we will continue to pay off of that because that happens in 18, is that correct?
Generally speaking, so far we've done pretty well with the CIP fees. That generally it has generated. It used to be the operating fund always transferred the funding for the debt service, and then we got the CIP fees, and then it was generating enough to do the debt service. I don't know. I'd have to look at it. I mean, debt service typically, the principal piece of it tends to step up, and
Right.
so it may just have kind of crossed that threshold where that year's principal is more than that 100,000.
And there was once I remember in a utility committee meeting, I was kind of told, never the twain shall meet. Sewer, you don't move money in the sewer and you don't move money in the water, but it kind of looks like we did that. I don't know if that's something to.
I think, can I just say a point of order, Mr. Mayor? I think that's an excellent idea, never to mix water and sewer in any way,
Yes.
shape, or form.
I would agree with that.
With props to Mrs. Carter.
What I mean to say is that the sewer, you can't move money back and forth between the sewer fund, and you can't move money
We
back and
asked
forth.
about that, and we're told basically by the auditors that had we established it as a water sewer utility and it combined them initially, then we could have. But since we've done a water utility and a sewer utility, they have to maintain separate.
But we can move money within the water, and we can move money within the sewer?
Yes,
Okay.
which is why the water operating fund is subsidizing.
That's
the
exactly why I asked the
debt
question.
service,
That's
yes.
exactly why I asked the question.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I just make a motion that we take a 5-minute recess.
That we what?
Yeah.
A 5-minute recess. I move we take just a 5-minute recess.
Do we have to do that by motion or anything, or just,
You can
I can just
simply
call 5 minutes?
recess.
Okay,
You can simply
we'll take a
call.
5-minute recess.
Thank you.
We'll be back at 8:08.
Get a little.
I was talking about you today in my science class.
We're
We were
almost
talking
done.
about just science.
Almost
I was like, I
done.
gotta tell you all about my friend Nate. And I was telling him, did you know that underneath the city there are all these things that water. And so class was like, what? Because they were talking about.
Okay, we'll reconvene here at 8:09 and pick up where we left off.
I teach 4 science.
Let's
classes.
see
That's a
here.
whole- So you're not gonna want to give up
I think
your
we're in the middle of,
But, like, if you
We're
came
missing a
and you met
Hicken.
Emily on
we're missing a Hicken. There he goes.
But I want them to see occupations in science. Like my brother, he does science. He's a forensic scientist. That's a
Yeah,
while
because
I've
I've made
been
updates to mine.
quietly in a lab all day long.
Okay, we're back to water and sewer. What's next? Anybody got any questions, input? Where did we leave off talking? Oh, I have a question before we get back on topic. How much longer is the meter program need to go on? Are we almost, how many years out?
Till I retire.
I'm sorry? Till you
Till we
retire?
retire. Well, so what we're doing, we've decreased that to 10,000, or by 20,000 actually, instead of a $40,000 project, 20 water and sewer. 10 and 10 because we've caught up with replacing some of the 30-year, 20-year-old meters, and we're at a healthy replacement pace. Usually when meters fail, they'll do one of two things: not read at all or read very, very low, or something breaks in it. So whether or not they're scheduled for replacement based on age, we do have failures, and that's just to keep our inventory going. That also includes large meters, so I'm
So the
trying to think.
program never really goes away?
No,
Okay.
it's a continual
Okay.
thing, and what I'll use too, like some of our commercial customers that might have an 1.5-inch meter, that's $1,000 meter. So we try and, well, keep up. Us leaving so many on the shelf does us no good. We do keep residential 3/4 meters on the shelf, but the big ones we don't, because it's just like a seal on a pump. If you're not using it, it'll dry out and wear, so we'll kind of do custom orders on when we need meters and the radio transmitters. Those babies are like, I want to say $135 a pop. But what we're able to do is take the old ones, they've got like batteries in them, basically, and they only operate when we come by and ping them or wake them up. So they've got a 15 to 20 year life expectancy, but if they fail before that, based on the model, we can get retroactive credit applied towards purchase of a replacement.
Okay.
So yeah, we're just kind of, it's an ongoing thing because it's our way to, well, it's how we track for charges. So, but yeah, sorry.
Okay. Anything else?
What were we talking about? Water?
Were we-
What are we in? Operational?
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna go to capital.
Well, let's see, water capital, yes, go ahead.
Well, let me throw out too, with the Traco idea, I should have got out in front of that a little better than I did. You know, Alan and I will shoot ideas with each other, and sometimes in the mix of the hubbub, I didn't put anything in there in my budget about this, because what my thought was, we spend in budget roughly $35,000. I think we're on pace for $35,000 this year in contractual excavation fees, which is solely water. We have very few sewer dig jobs. I would like to, at some point, have the staff and equipment to handle that all in-house. But me looking at an $80,000 purchase of a Traco, that would take 3 years, roughly, to get that back. So part of the idea, working with the service department, if we go that route, in my mind, I have $30,000 I could work with in operational fees to help maybe fund this, and then use it, and, you know, come up with a schedule how our guys could use it, their guys, make sure everybody's getting the work done type of thing. So it's one of those, I should have been out ahead of that a little more. It's just got away from me. So that was one of the ideas with our involvement in that, moving forward and get away from contractual fees, or at least having a contractor. My guys are capable, and you know, I've got one that I could heavily rely on for the digging portions, and my guys are really good with the pipe. It's just we don't have some of the equipment to make that happen right now. Just like a jet vac truck, I'd love to have one, but it's a $350,000 machine, and if I'm spending 20 or 30 in contractual fees, I'm going to stick with that. And same thing, when those things decide to go, they are very expensive. So
Well, that makes the mini excavator sound better to me if Alan can come up with and say, hey, I'm gonna use it, to Andy's point, how many days out of that 365 is that, you know, if a jet vat truck would only be used sparingly and wouldn't be worth it in the long run probably until we're farther down the road, but a mini excavator, if we used it, you know, 300 days out of 365, I'd feel much better, and if Alan was using it 70% of the time, or even 80, and you were using it 20 or 25, that sounds a lot better. And then we'd have a piece of equipment that we wouldn't have to go to Sunbelt. We wouldn't have to call somebody on an emergency and see if they even had one. Let alone pay the. So.
Yeah, something to think about. Something to. Again, I didn't do my best on that part of our conversations, putting it
You've explained
in writing.
it now.
So
you've explained it now.
But yeah, so that was
It's after
thought
the
idea.
recess, because we'll remember it.
What's that?
It's a good thing it was right after the
Yeah.
recess.
So to
And I
clarify,
had some candy too.
would part of the cost of the mini excavator be borne by the sewer department? The sewer,
Well,
not water?
we certainly could, because there could be a mix of water and sewer. You know, the sewer jobs that we usually do, well, a lot of our sewers are greater than 15 feet deep. But what we've used the excavator on is doing some recasting of manholes to grade and things like that. But yeah, there's a portion that, if we went that route to fund type of machine, I think we could, even
Jamie,
from
I mean-
the sewer portion, even just from ongoing.
Is that
We could easily,
copacetic?
we could either come back with a reimbursement relationship where the utility would
Yeah.
reimburse so much per day or something to the street fund, or we split it just straight down the middle when we do it.
But,
We
but,
could figure that out.
but I think the benefit is having it on hand rather than the use cost. And so I think that's my concern is having this Traco sit and waiting, if they use it 2 days out of the year, that's not gonna really give much money back to the street department. Whereas if it sits for 300 days, and it's available to the utility department, they should pay for some of that, right?
We absolutely could work out some
Okay.
arrangement. That's not a problem.
Anything else on that topic? Okay, that was water utility, or let's see, water capital improvements. Is that next?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, water capital improvements, anything? Okay. I would say next is sewer operations fund. Anything on that?
Do you have anything?
There's almost nothing in,
Yeah, the capital, we got a thing.
Just want to make sure we're, sewer, CI capital improvements funds, anything? Anything else for sewer and water?
Well, sewer, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah.
Can we go back over, I know we talked a little bit about this with the phosphate issues. Would you discuss that a little bit further
Sure.
for the upgrade project?
Yeah, so, what we are looking at, I'm almost complete with, an EPA required technical capability and technical and financial capability study, where, there is pending process, well, the EPA actually has the teeth of the code now to enforce, phosphorus limit on dischargers, wastewater dischargers, to a point of 1 milligrams per liter or less should be the discharge level. Our facility as it stands now cannot meet that. So what we've been doing is doing some test runs and some comparisons on some upgrades to equipment at our facility to meet that level. So the easiest capital upfront cost is to do chemical addition, to precipitate the phosphorus out of the filtered water. While that process, the capital to do that is an alternative, but the chemical consumption cost could be anywhere to $30,000 to $50,000 a year in chemical fees. We're actually test piloting a chemical now just to see exactly what is our dosage rate and then kind of get an idea what that would look for sure. So I have some actual numbers to put behind it. So what we're looking to do is do some upgrades to the facility to remove the phosphorus biologically or with our facility without chemical addition. So we have this project over the next 2 years, $1 million worth of spending. That's going to include some engineering. Anything that we would install has to be engineered and approved by the EPA through a permit to install process. So step one in this project is doing some design work in 2018 to identify improvements to the system and then do some construction possibly in 18 and construction in 19. One of the things that we need to do to address our facility, of course, we went through an upgrade that was completed in 2011. there's some deficiencies with that relating to the biological treatment portion of the process. We need more dissolved oxygen in our system to get biological phosphorus removal. So I need to add some aeration, diffused aerators, some blowers into our aeration system. Right now we just have surface mixers and it's not enough. We need more air to encourage the type of bugs that we need to attack the phosphorus in the biological form. So that's part of it, doing some design work with that. The other is we have a serious issue with our biosolids press. With the phosphorus process and trying to eliminate the side streams, while our press, it's what we have and it's what we work with and continue to maintain and repair and keep up with. Through the process, we take sludge that is treated and digested, and we run it through this machine that works with polymer as a coagulant to separate the liquid from the solids, so we get it to the cake product standpoint, where it's like 14% solids. Our current machine, with all the repairs that we've tried to do, even manufacturer reps coming out, when we run this machine, let's say our parts per millions of solid coming through the machine is 15,000 milligrams per liter. Of that 15,000 milligrams per liter, 3,000 of it is leaving the machine and getting recirculated back through the process, which causes some other treatment issues, but it's also adding unnecessary phosphorus load back into the head of our system. So if we can capture that and keep that from squeezing by, I then, with the aeration increase and then keeping those solids bound where they should be, I think we can biologically remove the phosphorus. But a part of this process too, just in case, if somebody smarter than me says this might not work, but we're going to go ahead and design for a chemical feed system just in case. So to kind of be out ahead of this, with our current permit, we're expecting that probably, well, this permit cycle ends in 2019. With our next permit starting in 2020, I would assume that we're going to have a phosphorus level of 1 milligram per liter or less. And I know without some pictures and stuff to really, I know that's a lot to throw in you, but we're trying to upgrade and address the plant holistically. Instead of saying, let's throw chemical at it, it may be $50,000 a year, which would do the job. It's not fixing the rest of the system. For example, I'll use this summer, one of our motors went down on our aeration system. Now, our guys worked their tails off to make sure we didn't have any permit violations. But with that one unit going out of service, it caused the backlash of issues throughout the facility. Higher ammonias, foaming issues, just things that happen with an older sludge that doesn't have enough air. We had some problems. So part of that, again, pointed to we need more air. So that's going to, and I'm sorry, one other thing. With looking at purchasing a new press, we've spent this summer trial running different presses, and we found a couple that we like that get the suspended solids down to 50 milligrams per liter of blow through the machine. But our current facility, the current building that our press is in now, is not big enough to accommodate a traditional belt filler press, so we're going to have to look at a building addition to accommodate this for the future. So 2018 and 2019, $1 million. I'm looking whatever we got to do to make this a 20, 30-year investment. That's what we're trying to do. Sorry.
Very interesting.
And as I understood it, it's the measurement at the outflow.
Yes.
Is the problem, because we're not in a diluted situation. That's
correct.
We're in a concentrated situation with a seasonal creek.
Yes.
Essentially.
Yeah, we the flow portion of our stream, the South Fork Licking River, where we go into, we're the major contributor into that stream. So they are a little more stringent with us than they might be on a larger body of water with higher flow.
So I guess I was thinking about that, and is there any way to work within that stream to capture, to be outside of the process? So for release, once it goes to the stream, can you not capture the phosphorus at that point?
No, because we're not out at the stream unless we go with a different filtration process.
It would have to be a different filtration,
yes,
obviously,
yes,
to try to capture it at that point.
Yeah, we could. Like, and there's facilities that have done that with some biomembrane filtration,
exactly,
or nanofiltration.
And if we're 90% of the water going in,
yeah.
I would. So the only thing I'm asking is
Yeah.
just to look at that,
Yeah.
because I think
Yeah.
you'll find that to be far less expensive than a total plant rehab
Yeah.
to do the press issue. Anyhow,
Yeah,
just a
well,
thought that I had.
And that's, in part of our data collecting through this process, and so you know too, I have some experience with the EPA fighting some cases like this, but I don't know how to say it other than they have deeper pockets than my past employer did to fight some of this stuff. But what we're trying to also do is prove with this that just forcing the phosphorus issue is only part of this, because we're doing downstream studies to say, if I do have, for example, our average phosphorus discharge level at the treatment plant could be anywhere from 3 parts per million to 1.5. That's kind of our range. So at that loading amount, you go downstream 100 yards down from our facility,
You're at a half.
we're at 0.3.
Yeah.
That was our average for 2016 and 17. So my argument would be, well, yes, phosphorus is an evil, nasty thing for algal blooms and things like that. You do not see our impact on the stream at that standpoint. So I'm hoping that even if we go into this willing and say, hey, I've identified some deficiencies in our facility that needs to be addressed, but if one of those advantages of making this change also reduces our phosphorus potential, maybe we can say, hey, we've made some improvements, can we leave it at that? And some of their TDML loading calculations, they make the math, let me say the math can work to anyone's advantage if you want to make a point.
Okay.
So,
I just bring it up, $1 million over 2 years is a lot of money, and if there's alternates that might work better, I would just hopefully we've already looked at those.
and part of this too, while it started out as a $2 million project, we are also on the heels of an upgrade project that we're paying debt on. I didn't want to take out a loan to put on top of a loan. I wanted to see what we could do on a cash basis with capacity fees and things like that to responsibly make some adjustments to the facility. And so.
Okay, any other comments on sewer and water? That's our last topic for the evening. You want to recap or close? Yes, sir.
I wanted to jump back to just a general kind of discussion for a second.
Okay.
2 minutes.
All
2
right.
minutes. And it's basically, I've got 4 questions. And, we have a $10,000 payment that we've paid to Licking County, to the Licking Development. CIC. And I wondered where that was. Is that included in the budget? Is already something that is proposed to be in the budget? Obviously, we haven't approved it at this point.
It would be in the administration's general government. I don't know off the top of my head if you put it in there or not. I assume you probably did.
Oh, yeah.
Was it a 3-year?
It's in there.
We do a yearly obligation.
We do it yearly.
Yeah, a yearly obligation is passed by
$10,000
council.
a year.
Right. So again, this is, I know seem like we're being very picky with our departments, but at the same time, these outside costs that are out there, this development, I really hope we look at that strongly when it comes back around to us to evaluate that $10,000. Another one I wanted to bring up was we have talked about a community event fund budget line item to be allocated for community events for the city to participate. I think the number has been thrown around about $5,000. I know, I'm sure BJ hasn't put that in because we haven't approved it, but at the same time, where would that go in the budget?
You mean beyond material and manpower?
Well, I think it's a
material
way to
and manpower
capture-
Would be in whatever fund. So if the police officer doing overtime, it'd be in the police budget. If it was in the streets, it'd be in the street budget. Now, if you're talking about cash donations or very specific things, then we can we can do it in the administration.
Well,
budget.
an example would be in the Cookie Walk, shutting down 310 and utilizing police forces to do that, utilizing the signs, the electronic signs, and I guess cleaning up after the fact once it's done. That's kind of a progression, I guess, and I know I'm not speaking for council as that's approved in any way, shape, or form, but if that were, how would that be funded in the budget?
I mean, I guess it would be, typically you would fund it in the departmental budget, so it'd be the police overtime, it'd be the public service department's overtime.
So we'd have to take that 5,000 and then dissect it into pieces.
And that's where it gets kind of complicated for the effort for the benefit. We have to look at that.
So we couldn't do just like a reimburse, like, so let's talk about just what we were talking about the utilities. Couldn't we have like a $5,000 fund that reimbursed those departments for their work? Like they almost.
It would be an interfund transfer, and yeah, council could approve that.
Okay.
But where is it coming from? Is it coming from the recreation fund, the general fund, the park fund? I mean,
General fund? I don't know. I'm just asking if we have to come up with that first, but I'm wondering how that would operate.
it'd be an interfund transfer between funds.
Okay. We've, another discussion that we've had is about increasing the level of communication to the community, even going into a point where we're investing in having someone go out and help us with these new technologies and how they, Twitter, whatever, all the new technologies. That's not new, I know. But anyhow, the newer ones that I don't even know of yet. And I wanted to bring that up yet again for the budget in general. I think it's time to talk about that and make sure we keep that in mind. I brought up to BJ and to Jamie about the comprehensive plan. We're talking about bringing in a consulting company to help with the comprehensive plan. I know BJ's point was to try to get that under the 2017 budget, but I don't know where that is in the 2017 budget or how it would happen. If it doesn't happen in 2017, it'd be in 18. So yeah, that's another piece to keep in mind, I guess, for the budget. See if I have any other ones. I asked this question to Jamie about, with the litigation cases that we've had and the increase in insurance parts. I remember there's some numbers that were thrown around earlier in the year about what the increases in our insurance was because of the litigation cases that we've been through. I'm hopeful that that's in the budget. I assume it is, Jamie, and you said that at the beginning of the year you'll get a new statement that'll show the increase.
We'll be getting the information on our renewal here any day now, probably the next couple of weeks to work with the departments, and then that's a process between now and January. They'll look at our the amount of money they had to pay for outside counsel defending, and that'll factor into the calculations.
And that's not spread apart. That's not spread across all the different departments. That's a.
It is. There's multiple components in the liability and property casualty. So the specific identified assets belong to police cruisers. We pay so much for the police cruisers to be insured. So yeah, that goes to the police department. The public service department has dump trucks and plows and all of that, and those costs go there. Then there's an allocation of errors and omission, professional liability, those types of things that are based on, and generally what we've done, and I'm trying to remember the formula, but I believe it's based on budget size. So the bigger the budget, the more allocation you get of, assuming there's additional liability being a bigger budget. So there's a spreadsheet that we drop all that into. So yeah, it's allocated across general, police, street, water and sewer funds. Everybody gets a piece of the premium.
And you've already you put a percentage on that to increase for this budget without knowing exactly what it would be.
Right.
Hopefully, we'll cover. I'm assuming it would cover.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. That's all I have.
Anything, Suzanne?
No, thank you.
Chicken?
I would only say that as a reminder, in the past, every time we go through this exercise, some people say, "Hey, I don't want that new whatever," and we will need as a council to make a final determination if items are being pulled out of the budget. It makes it hard on, for instance, the finance director. If I am adamant that I do not want a backhoe and it ends up in there, even though there was spirited discussion back and forth. So keep that in mind as we move forward. I talked to Jamie this morning. Thank you very much for meeting with me, by the way. And he kind of informed me that where you look at that is on the attachment to the resolution. We're going to have the second reading on
16th?
Next Monday. And so I don't know if that is going to be the time to make that determination, but remember, if we change it on the third reading, it'll go one more. I don't know if that fits in with Mr. Barstow's kind of calendar stuff, but, you know, and I know the accelerated model of making sure this gets done, but.
We're running a meeting ahead.
Yeah, we're ahead, and if I can follow Mr. Higgins' comment, I mean, if a council member has an objection to a specific part of a piece of legislation, I believe that our rules allow for a personal privilege to withdraw that and be voted on separately. So we've done that a couple times with legislation. I know Mrs. Sager did that a couple of times on some contract issues, and I believe that we may have done it. I've seen it done on budget issues, and I don't know if we've done it since I've been on council. So that's something that, on the second reading, so members, if you have an objection to a backhoe or a police shed or a big press down at the product plant or something, that's the time to ask to have that backed out and be voted on separately.
Yeah, the reason, the discussion I had this morning with Tim, in not recent history, but there has been times when one or two council members would say, I don't want that in there. And then the next council meeting, when it was still in the legislation, they were mad because I didn't take it out. And I just was saying, I need a general direction from this body. You know, it doesn't be voted, but if I get the consensus that everyone's like, no, we're not doing that. Okay, fine, it's out. But if one person says I want it out and everyone else is, you know, whistling and I don't know, I look for a general direction from the body. Is what the conversation we were having.
Mr. Mayor, and we've had that happen where it's been obvious from council comments that if we had taken a vote, whatever it was, that would not have survived.
And in that case,
So-
you just make sure Mr. King knows so that he gets
Right.
with Kathy and Jamie and gets that
rerouted or rewritten or whatever so that we have it for the next time.
Right, but if a council member sees something in the legislation, sees it in the budget they don't want, they should ask to have that line and refer to it by line
Make sure
item.
there's a consensus and then it's taken out, so.
And, well, no, I'm talking, if a council member wants to make a point on voting on an issue, whatever, the backhoe, we talked about the backhoe, just for example, then have that line item, asked to have, it as a point of privilege, have that taken out and voted on as a separate item and see if it passes. If it fails, then it goes out of the budget. If it passes 6-1, then it stays in the budget. But have that ready to go.
And I would even add to that to have it amended. So I'm going to use an example, for instance, of the improvements to the Mink Road. You know, let's amend that to a $20,000 number for doors only. So it's an amendment or a removal.
Yes,
That's correct.
Yes, exactly.
That's correct.
Exactly. Okay.
Thank you. Anything, Mrs. Carter?
Nope.
Okay, again, thank you, sir. We're
Thank
ahead
you,
of
all
schedule.
department heads.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks.
guys.
Scott, you've been awfully chatty tonight, and that's,
We're not giving you any money next year.
yeah, it's, again, I think it's fabulous that we are working on something so diligently. It's very, very important, and after many years of seeing it shoved down my throat, the last meeting before Christmas, this is a pleasant surprise, and I didn't even need a break. That's how exciting it was, so I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Before you do a motion, I want to echo something Suzanne said last meeting. You know, this is a great experience to work with people that can have an intelligent, rational discussion, and it isn't, you know, screaming and yelling. And that goes for the departments. That goes for everybody involved in it, and it truly makes it worthwhaul doing. So
I go home almost
I appreciate
every
everybody's
feeling that way.
Yeah, everybody's you know,
Yeah.
maturity.
Yeah.
There you go. That's
Need a
the word.
motion?
So
Motion
moved.
adjourned.
Motion by Suzanne, seconded by
Me.
Mrs.
Second.
Carter. Discussion and roll, please.
Hayes,
Yes.
Barstow,
No.
Be careful now, we don't have a whole lot
I
of
don't have a
people.
whole lot of people.
You stay.
Yes.
Walter,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes, please.
Meeting adjourned.
Barstow stays the whole day.
I was so excited by the budget.
Chairs down.
Barstow, I'll bring you a sub. You'll be here till Monday.
Thank you.
Subway, it's what he always
Wait, that's
eats.
what he brings.
Tonight I didn't have to.
That's all I know about him. He eats Subway.
Monday night.